everybody. Happy Tuesday and welcome to another Tech Strong TV broadcast. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon. Today is Tuesday, April 26th. We got a lot of stuff going on today, and we're going to get things kicked off on today's episode with the Haunted Hacker podcast. This is part two of a great two-part conversation that Mike Jones, the host, has with Tanya Jonka, who is the founder and CEO over at We Hack Purple Academy, which is a learning platform dedicated to teaching application security, Devsecops, and cloud security. She's also the best-selling author of Alice and Bob Learn Application Security. So Tanya and Mike talk about so many different things happening in cybersecurity, and she also shares some very exciting news. So part one we ran on Monday's episode. This is part two. I highly recommend that you check out part one of the conversation, but certainly this one is a good one as well. After that, we have our Devops Unbound episode. This one is titled Leveraging Devops Dojos and Centers of Excellence. Those both are not new concepts to the world of DevOps, but in this episode, Mitch Ashley and Alan Schimmel speak with Larry Macaron from Contrast Security and Sharon Alvarez from Salesforce, both of whom have a lot of experience in centers of excellence and creating DevOps dojos. They discuss some of the benefits of DevOps dojos and centers of excellence, and they also offer up some insight into how you can build your own DevOps dojo. Good stuff there. After that, we have our Something Old segment, and this one is from the recent Secure Software Summit virtual event that we hosted earlier this year. This presentation features Dan Larenk from ChainGuard Inc. His presentation is titled Risk and Reward, the State of Open Source Supply Chain Security. We've been talking a lot about securing software supply chains, especially when it comes to open source security, because of all the issues that have cropped up with different versions and vulnerabilities being discovered well after it's out into the wild. He offers up some covering some recent attacks and some open source initiatives that are going to help get this problem under control, hopefully. Specific topics in his presentation include Sig Store, in Toto, the update framework, and the Open SSF. Some of which we are well familiar with, others not so much. So this is a great presentation, and I'm sure there are a lot of takeaways in it. After that, I'm back with the news headlines. Then I have a great conversation with Juan Orlandini, who is the distinguished engineer over at Insight. Juan and I talk about a recent research report that was commissioned by Insight, and it was done by IDG Research Services. One of the really kind of, I don't know, maybe depressing things of that came out of the report is the fact that organizations are still very much challenged by moving from operations and development silos into a DevOps model. So we talk about why this continues to be a thorn in the side, an issue, and what organizations can do to kind of help turn the tide, if you will. It is a great conversation, and it's actually a very, very interesting report. Highly encourage you to check that out as well. If you listen to the interview, we do tell you how to get the report itself, so do want to check that one out. After that, I've got the webinar's preview for you, and then we close things out with The View with Vizard. In this one, Mike Vizard is speaking with Sonar Source CEO Olivier Godin, who I've spoken to in the past. He's an awesome dude. He talks about the $400 million investment that Sonar Source recently got, and how it's going to be applied to improve the quality of code. Good stuff there. All right, that's it for the lineup. We got a lot going on today's show, and we're going to get things kicked off right after these commercial messages.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more.
All right, we are back. Next up, we've got the Haunted Hacker podcast. This one features Tanya Jonka speaking with Mike Jones, the host. Tanya is the founder and CEO at We Hack Purple Academy, which is a learning platform dedicated to teaching application security, Devsecops, and cloud security. She's also got some exciting news to share among the other many topics that they discussed during the podcast, so do check it out. We're going to go ahead and roll it right now.
So tell me a little bit about Neural Legion.
So Neural Legion is now called Bright Security. They changed their name 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I've been on their advisory board for about a year and a half. And they are about, by the time this is aired, they have acquired We Hack Purple. And so We Hack Purple is like we did some workshops together in 2020, and then we did more stuff together in 2021. And they're like, we just raised a bunch of money. What if both of our companies became just like one company? And so the plan is to start making a lot of things free from We Hack Purple, and making way more courses and educational content that's just free for literally everyone, so that we can just like break down those barriers. And what they do is they create a DAST, and the idea of their dynamic scanner is that it's for software developers. So like a thing that frustrated me when I joined security is like, why do you write everything in security words? If we want software developers to use this and software developers to fix this, why don't we talk to them how they talk to each other? Like, your session ID should be ephemeral. I'm like, that's garbage. First of all, that's not specific enough for them to fix any sort of bug. And second of all, like, why are you being vague? Like, what they want is my session ID will expire every 15 minutes of unuse, or if it is used every 60 minutes. It must be 28 characters. The characters must be generated using blah. Like, do you know what I mean? And I felt like a lot of the tools out there were not. They were serving experts. They were serving security experts. So for instance, like if I take Burp Suite for a drive as a person that was a pen tester, like it's like a scalpel in a surgeon's hand. Do you know what I mean? And I'm like, but not everyone has time to become an expert. And so what if you're like, I just want to press play and make sure nothing explodes? Yeah. And so that is a thing that we've been working on, like closer and closer and closer. And I guess like we're very close now because we're one organization. And they knew that my dream was to make We Hack Purple free. So some people want to like own their own yacht and be like super rich. And I'm not saying that I want to be poor, but what I wanted to do with We Hack Purple was change our industry and like break down some of those barriers so people could actually join in and actually do really excellent application security. And so that's why I wrote the book. I think I've made $8,000 from the book so far. And it took me like 10 zillion years to write it, or maybe like 9,000, but not very much money. And it's a bestseller, right? And so like you do these things because you really are passionate and you want to change your industry. And so like them coming in and basically like giving me that helping hand up, if that makes sense. Like I was like, I'm only coming if it can be free. And they're like, yeah, we know. Like, oh, okay.
That's pretty awesome. So the book, I know you're a bestseller with the book, and I think that's pretty awesome. Writing a book is so intimidating. I don't know how you got through the process. So tell me about that process and what it took to get it from point A to the shelf.
Okay, so it all started with this guy named Brock that worked at Microsoft. So he dared me to start a blog. He's like, I dare my entire team to start a blog and to write one blog post a week for a month. And if you don't have at least 10 readers by then, like you win. I can't remember what we would win. And I was like, well, what do we get? What do you get if we win? And he's like, I get a person on my teammate who has an awesome blog. And I was like, okay, this is a pretty good dare. I'm gonna show him. And I don't know how to, like, this might sound really dumb. And in retrospect, maybe, but I didn't think anyone would want to read it. So I wrote my first blog post, I wrote another one, and I did the 4 that he said. And then I had a couple hundred readers almost immediately. And I was like, seriously? And so then I wrote this blog series about a talk I'd given. So it was called Pushing Left Like a Boss, because I think I'm funny. And it was about, the idea of the system development lifecycle and where we could add security to it. And just basically like steps that you could try to do at home. And it ended up being 21 parts. And then people started writing me and saying, do you want to write a book? And I was like, oh, is this email to the wrong person? I'm sorry. I just kept thinking that. And so this guy from Wiley, Jim Menetel, who ended up becoming my publisher, he wrote me and he's like, I bet you have more to say. I'm like, yeah. And he's like, you know that like a certain number of people will read your blog, but when you're a published author, you can add a 0 to that of the level of exposure you'll get. You're not going to make a ton of money, but you will share your message with that many more people. And he's like, writing a book is hard. I'm like, well, I learned French as an adult and I'm dyslexic. So I'm learning disabled and it's extremely difficult. Like it's very, very difficult. And I'm like, and I did that. So I feel like I can do a lot of things. And so he set out a schedule for me, which I screwed up, and then I screwed up the next one. But then eventually, so the book did come out like 4 or 5 months late because I spent more time writing it than expected. Mostly, not writing it. So I was awesome at writing, like editing. Editing is so hard, and technical editors. So basically what I did was I hired my biggest troll as my technical editor. Yeah. So he would always pick apart my articles and he would always be like, there's this nuance that you missed, or there's this very, very advanced security version you didn't offer. And I was like, Dom, you are being a perfectionist. And he's like, we have to tell the whole story, Tanya. And he was like, it didn't matter what I did. He would like give me feedback and it would be accurate feedback because he is a genius. He's very, very experienced in AppSec, but he was also just like so meticulous. And I was like, would you be my tech? And he's probably like expecting me to write him and tell him to go to hell, right? and then he said yes, and it was awesome, but it was hard to receive such intense criticism. And like I remember writing him at one point, and I'm like, okay, I feel like you're hurting my feelings at this point. But as a result of hiring, then I got him, and then I got another person that's his friend who's also amazing. And between the two of them, they were so, I had to rewrite. I have not had a single person be able to dispute a single point in my entire book, and it's 225 pages.
Wow.
Like no one has been able to disprove a single thing. There's been small grammatical errors, like, it says is and it should be but there's been no major errors in the entire book, which is like, I was expecting to have, I don't know about you, but being a woman on the internet, people like to criticize us. And so I was expecting people to be like, rah! And so far, no one's been able to find any technical errors. I've had people say like, oh, I wish you would like dive deeper into this or that. And I'm like, oh, that's a great idea. I should. But yeah, so writing the book, super awesome. I loved that part. Technical edits, I found it really hard on the ego. And just researching again and again and again. And then partway through the book, an old security header kind of got killed. So the XSS protection header, it turns out that there are vulnerabilities involved with it, and it's only for backwards compatibility. And then it turns out like modern apps could be attacked with it. And so then a whole bunch of us had this huge discussion about it online, and we all decided that we're just going to kill that security header. And I'm like, do I really have this much power?
That's awesome.
Do you know what I mean? Like I was like, I was just like, okay, hi guys. So then I wrote about it in my book, and I was just like, wow. And now I will quote my book to people. I'll be like, if you look at page 99, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, it's a fact now.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah. And then in my technical, so you have to give evidence of all of your things. And so then in 2 separate things, because my career has gotten longer and longer, I was like, I actually got to quote myself as my reference for some things. I was like, I was like, because this was invented at this time by, I was like, oh, that was me.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but like looking at something that you've done in the past as it's relevant now, is kind of weird to begin with. Like I remember I wrote a screenplay for Alyssa Knight, and then seeing it on IMDb, I was like, just kind of like weird, because it was something I did, but there it is in front of me.
Yeah.
So we talked about social media, and that's kind of where I ran into you, was on social media. And so that's been a hot topic on a couple podcasts that I've done, is social media and the craziness that ensues. The trolling, the craziness. How do you deal with trolls and just some of the garbage that goes on social media?
So I have a person that moderates my messages for me and takes out all the mean ones, because I decided I was too sensitive and I couldn't handle that. And so I never receive any death threats, as far as I know. I never receive really mean emails because I decided it was worth it to me to pay a few $100s a week to not have to see that. Because I learned that I was very, very sensitive. And if I want to remain sensitive, I decided it was worth that. However, I do still see the tweets that people send to me. And I think part of so I get, compared to some of my colleagues that are women, I feel like I get kid gloves. People tend to be very gentle with me because I guess I put gentleness out there. And I also don't trash things. I rarely say negative things about other, this person is bad because blah. If I have a problem with someone, I will write a private message to them and be like, I don't like that this happened. Can we talk about it? Well, a lot of people will say bad things about people behind their back. I tend to say good things about people behind their back. I had a conference write me and they're like, so we just had the third speaker tell us that they applied for the only reason because you say so many good things about us. And I just want you to know that we know you're saying good things about us behind our back and we really like it.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah. But if you put that out there into the world, you're more likely to get goodness back. But still, there are people where they have some sort of anger that they want to get out for whatever reason. And sometimes I have to remember, I'm like, this isn't about me. I didn't do an unkind thing to this person. And they're having a day for whatever reason, and try to reframe that. And also, I think that social media is weird. I see a lot of, so I've had people write me and they'll point out other influencers and say, that person has no idea what they're talking about. Are you going to call them out? And I'm like, no, I don't have energy for that in the world. And I know that there's some people that speak at conferences and all they do is give these fluffy talks where they're basically just regurgitating the news to us with pretty slides. And I'm like, I don't need to do that. That's not my work and that's not my job. And also whatever that person is doing, that's their business. And maybe they're really good at Twitter and tweeting and getting attention. And maybe they aren't really great at security, but if conferences want to book them, that's not my problem.
Right.
That's not my problem. I'm competent. I'm very proud of that. But someone else being incompetent, that's not my problem unless they work for me.
Exactly.
Exactly. Yeah. And I have to say my team right now are A+. So,
that's awesome. Yeah. So
I have the best team. They're so great.
I've had to deal with the garbage that goes on with social media a couple times, but I found that if I just ignore it and just keep doing what I'm doing, they end up falling off and going away. But that's one thing I'm really passionate about, because I see how social media influences kids and how it affects kids and their psyche and the damage that it does to them as far as bullying and stuff like that. And it's devastating to watch. I watched an 11-year-old literally just break down over things that were said on the internet. And to me, that really struck me. It's wait a minute. As an industry, we created this whole, I guess, ecology on social media. That's us. We created that disaster. Yeah. And, I just hope someday it finds a way to right itself on course, because it is a very powerful tool, but it also could be a very powerful weapon too. And I always tell kids, you really have to be responsible and look at things as if it's not real. You can disconnect from a computer and you're a completely different person. Don't get absorbed into this craziness.
I feel like influencers and people who are quite famous, I feel like there's a certain level of responsibility that we should have, but no one can enforce that on us.
Right.
But like, for instance, so I'm an attractive lady, but I post photos where I'll have messy hair too, because I look like that. I don't always look like makeup and lights and really good camera angles, right? And I feel like it's important to people to see all the sides. So like I had some new press photos done. I look really good. And then on Sunday, I was out with I have a wood chipper. And so there's like a picture of me covered in sawdust and I'm like wearing a hard hat and I'm like, right. And I feel like sometimes, especially I guess on Facebook, not to pick on one social media platform above the rest, however, it is my least favorite. I feel like people will always put their best perfect foot forward where everything's just great and everything's amazing and my life is roses all the time. And I feel like if we can share when things aren't going as well, or how hard things are, or how much work something was, etc., and be like a bit more transparent about things, especially as people have more and more followers and we're more and more clear about that, I feel like then people can have a better picture. Because I've had people say like, oh, well, how did you do that? And then I'll tell them how much work I put into something. People are like, oh, well, you were just naturally always good on stage. I'm like, no, I was a professional entertainer for 17 years. Wow. I've been on stage. So like, and then I started public speaking. And so I've been on stage for 24 years. Basically, there was 1 year where I wasn't on stage because my music career had like winded down a fair bit, and my speaking, I guess maybe there was overlap, but so I've been, and I did acting when I was younger, et cetera, et cetera. And so I'm like, so actually, no, like it took me a zillion years to become that good at it. Or when they're like, oh, like you just like people suggested to me that I just let someone interview me a few times and then have someone just write the book for me and put my name on it because that would just be way easier. And I'm like, well, I get like, that's not the way I run my life. If I put my name on something, I mean it. And I've had people offer to have my name put on things I didn't write. They're like, you know, you could co-author this book. I'm like, but I didn't do that. I'm confused. Please repeat. And there's lots of people that get those offers and they say yes, right? And so I feel like if we could be a bit more transparent or a bit more open and honest about things, like maybe then when someone sees someone being awful to someone on social media. Okay, so one other point on this. So when I was younger, I was in college and I did this class project. I'm basically the project manager of because we're learning about project management. She assigned 100% of the work to me because I was the best coder. But there was 4 of us in the project. And so I started failing my other classes because I was doing this whole project. And it was a 1-year project. So it went over multiple semesters. And so I went to the big boss and I was like of the class. And I was like, I gotta quit. I gotta drop out because I'm going to fail every other class. And he was like, why? And so then she had written a thing saying I should be expelled because I didn't obey her and she's my project manager. And like, she actually came into one of my classes and physically yanked me out of a class. And she's like, you should be working on this project. You're not allowed in that class anymore. And I was like, what? And I was like, and I'm like 21 or something. I'm just a kid, right? And anyway, so she wrote a letter demanding that I be expelled from the school. And then the guy was like, wow, she's awful. She fails. And then I got a chance to repeat and do it with another team. And it was much better. Anyway, and so I was complaining to this guy. I'm like, oh, like she's so mean to me. And he's like, Tanya, did you ever think this wasn't about you? Did you ever think that the whole world does not revolve around Tanya? And it's actually that she was so worried, first of all, that she couldn't code it herself and that she couldn't count on the other team members to do a good job. And that and that there were all these other factors. And like, he's like, she wrote like this 3-page manifest about why you should be expelled. And it was actually all about her. I didn't get to read it, but that's what the professor told me. It was all about how her life was really awful and she was having these challenges, so I should be expelled. And he's like, do you ever think that this is actually all her problems? And she exploded at you, but she would have exploded at anyone that was close to her. And she probably exploded at the other 2 team members too, and they just didn't tell you. And like, maybe it's all something that's happening in her, and it's not okay what she did, but like, don't blame yourself, dude. You did the best you could. And I was like, oh. And so since then, when someone like it reacts in such a huge way where it comes out of nowhere, I think about it and I'm like, do my actions justify that type of thing? No. There's probably something else wrong. And then you can actually ask them, are you okay? One of my friends used to be a bouncer, and he said like this guy came in and he's this huge man and he wanted to pick a fight, and he's like screaming and screaming, and he just put his hand on his arm. He's like, are you okay, man? And he's like, my fiance left me. And this huge man just started crying, and he ended up like hugging him and holding him and like showing him out and getting him a cab. And sometimes it has nothing to do with you.
Right.
And like, if you can remember that, and I realize like people saying awful things about you on the internet feels bad. And I'm not saying your feelings are invalid, but sometimes it comes from a place where they are so much worse off than you, and they are torturing themselves way more than they are you.
Yep.
And if we can have, it sounds weird to have empathy for someone that's being cruel to you, but it can make you feel a lot better.
Yeah, and that's like the ultimate form of forgiveness too, is having that empathy for somebody like that. And you make a very good point. Like a lot of the bullies for kids, have gone through that. Those bullies were bullied by somebody else, or maybe they're being bullied at home. You never know. I always tell people, before you lash out at somebody, why don't you take a step back and think about what they may be going through at that point in time? Because it could be something really disastrous that we just don't know about. You never can tell what's behind the curtain unless you ask that person. But yeah, so the social media stuff, a lot of us spend our life on social media, especially, with being leaders in the industry. And what I found, and this is really interesting, and I found it last year, was when I was the most genuine and giving people insight into my personal struggle or something that had happened to me personally, and relating that, let's say on LinkedIn, those articles or those posts would get 10 times more viewers than something I would post professionally. And what I found is that we disconnect ourselves as people so much that people really find that valuable to have that personal connection.
Oh yeah, I totally agree with you. And also, like, sometimes there's a lot of feelings involved in the actions that we take professionally, if that makes sense. I wrote this article called Jobs in Infosec, and I wrote it because I was trying to explain not everyone's a pen tester, the firewall guy, or the risk person, right? And there's actually tons of jobs. And then I described each one, and it got 43,000 reads the first month. And my previous top was like 4,000. And I was like, whoa. And it still gets hundreds and hundreds of reads every month. And it's because I tapped into a feeling that a lot of people have, and that's bewilderment and being overwhelmed with, like, they're excited by cybersecurity. There's all these different, and they don't know what the jobs are. So I just described them. Just, forensics, like you go and you check what happened after a security incident, try to figure out what was going on and what damage was caused. And then you usually try to help them fix it. And people are just like, wow. Like, yeah, it took me years of talking to different people to figure out that's what that job was, because I wasn't doing it.
Yeah, exactly. And then when you look at the mind map, so I've seen people map out biologically what cybersecurity looks like, and just looking at the graphic gave me a headache. I was like, there's that many positions in cybersecurity. It's tremendous. I mean, it's phenomenal.
I know, when I was a software developer, like when I started, you were a software developer. And then you might be a Windows programmer, or you might be a web programmer, and then you might be like a Ruby programmer or a Python programmer. But now you're front end, back end, software architect, and all that. But then when I went into cybersecurity, I'm like, this is crazy. There's so many different jobs, and even within AppSec. So like sometimes you are the entire AppSec team, and that's cool. But sometimes you're the security architect. Sometimes you're the threat modeler. Sometimes you're the person that writes all the policies. Sometimes you're that like the Devsecops engineer. You're the person like putting things in pipelines and making sure you don't break builds by accident. And like, there's so many different cool jobs within the field. And yeah, just like, it's like you're pulling back the curtain, being like, hey, you want to see the truth?
Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of people need that too, because a lot of the kids that I've talked to, when we talk about cybersecurity and that career path, the first thing that always comes to mind is I want to be a pen tester. And, I'm like, well, why? Why do you want to be a pen tester? Well, I've seen this on TV. I've seen this in the movies, and it's, it's this, that, and the other. And I'm like, okay, no. Let's take media out of it because it's not that sexy. It's really not. And then I explained to them the other positions, and people are like, well, wait a minute. I draw really good. Is there a position for that? And I'm like, yeah, graphic design. We need all kinds of graphic design. But what I found really cool is that like people coming from other industries into our industry. I've seen lawyers, healthcare workers, policemen. And I think it's really awesome that we're attracting that type of industry into our own little circle.
Remember, you were talking about how you're very passionate about veterans. Veterans are so good for coming into cybersecurity because of their previous experience, especially with being able to see threats and risks that the rest of us have just never experienced before.
Exactly.
Yeah. I have found a lot of veterans where I'm just like, oh, I would never have thought, like, oh yeah, definitely. And I mean, depending upon what they did in the military, some of those skills might also transfer over, not just the mindset. And so, yeah, I've seen a lot of programs to try really hard to kind of, I guess the word is like attract them, like, over here, cyber, hello.
Exactly.
Look at us, we like you.
I mean, look at Ken Underhill. Ken Underhill was like a field medic in the military, and now he's one of the industry leaders. It's weird how it attracts different people and where they fall into the grooves of cybersecurity. But I don't think we do enough for the kids to explain those things because a lot of them are being driven by the media. And it's just like, no, let me re-educate, forget everything you've already learned about what cybersecurity is. And let me tell you what it really is. And then they kind of change a little bit. They get more interested. But I love talking to kids about cybersecurity because they're so fresh and they're like really excited. And I see some of that in some of the veterans that I've worked with as well. Oh, wait a minute, that equates to what I did over here in the military. Mm-hmm. And so that excitement, I think, is what keeps me going, seeing other people coming into the industry and finding that groove. It's really cool.
I have been invited many, many times to speak about basically, especially to get girls and young women they're like, just get them into tech. I'm like, no, I'm definitely going to try to make them all AppSec engineers. I'm sorry, but I'm really biased. And if you're not okay with me trying so hard to convince them that my field is the one they definitely need to work in, then you need someone else.
Exactly.
But yeah, I feel like, I feel like if more of us did a bit more outreach, so sometimes I'll suggest to someone, you should give a talk. Your job's super interesting. And they'll all say, oh, no, not me. No one wants to hear what I have to say. And I'm like, do you love your job? Because then we do. If you hate your job, no, we don't want to hear about that. And you should also find a job you love because like, I don't know how to say this, but if I didn't do AppSec, like there's so many other jobs in cyber that I would want to try. Yeah. Like, I think forensics is really cool. I think threat hunting is fascinating. I think just responding to incidents, it's like the adrenaline rush is amazing. Like there's so many cool jobs. Yeah.
There's a lot of really cool stuff. And fortunately, with the company I'm with now, I get to try a lot of that. So I come from a pen testing background and I help build SOCs or whatever. But with this new company I'm with, I've been there for about 7 months now. I've been involved in incident response and forensics and threat hunting. And it's so cool to see all aspects of it come together. And being in the industry for over 20 years, everything I see is still new. It's not like, oh, I've seen this before. Everything is brand new. And I think it's important to like your job. Like you said, like, if I woke up one morning and didn't like my job, then that would probably be my last day. Because my thought is I spend most of my time working. And I have so many hats that I wear. If I didn't enjoy and love what I do with complete passion, then I would have to move on to something else because life is too short to spend it in a role that you don't want to be in.
I agree. And especially, so I feel like we're spoiled in cybersecurity because there's so much opportunity. Like I keep telling people, once you have your first role, stay there at least 1 year and then the world is literally your oyster.
Yep.
It's literally your oyster. I was joking when I left Microsoft that like a white van was going to stop and just throw me in, and it would be people just wanting me to do AppSec because it's so hard to hire for AppSec. And then when I started the academy and people were hiring people that hadn't even completed the program yet, they're like, no, then we won't be able to afford them when they're done. And I'm like, whoa.
Exactly. Yeah. And Microsoft is a really interesting institution as well, because I think Microsoft gives a lot of people that push and that kind of elevation to go out and conquer bigger things. Just from my short visit there, like I remember when they brought the smart car without a driver that picked me up and took me to the different buildings. And I thought, this is mind blowing. I mean, this is 2005. What is going on here? This is like the Jetsons. And then all the people there were really cool, and the culture was really different than what I was used to. But back then they did the different types of interviews too. It wasn't a technical interview. It was more of a psychological profile.
Okay.
I don't think they do those anymore. I talked to Vidya, who is another friend of mine. She works there. She said, no, we don't do those anymore. But back then, one of the questions they asked me, I was in this really cluttered room, and this lady says, I'm thinking of an object in this room, and it's your job to figure out what that object is by asking the least amount of questions. And I was mind blown. I was like, why? What is this for? What am I doing here? But they were on a different level, even back in 2005. Even the way that they looked at potential employees and the mindset and what it took to be part of Microsoft. I found that really interesting. Google is another one of them that was on a different level even back then. But I've seen some great things from people who came from Microsoft back in the day, and it's really impressive. So, well, Tanya, it's been awesome having you on, and I definitely want to catch up with you again, maybe a month or two from now and see where everything's at. And I'm really excited for you and the news that you have coming through the pipeline. Any last thoughts before we shut things down?
I'd really like to invite people to join the We Hack Purple community. It's free. There's no upsell. So there's no thing that you can buy in there. Everything is just free. Because the more people that join, the more value there is for every person. And we don't want you to join and then do nothing. We want you to meet new friends. I want you to do your first talk. I want you to write your first article. So like some people are like publishing an article in there for the first time. And so any member can do that. As long as you follow the code of conduct, you can just share whatever you want, or like, I read this article and I like it because, and it sounds weird, but I wanted to make my favorite place on the internet, and I did. And so if you want to meet people who are nice, who are interested in security, that's where we're at. And so it's just community.wehackpurple.com.
And I suggest and encourage all the listeners for the Haunted Hacker podcast to go and join. Definitely the Haunted Hacker stamp of approval for that, for sure. Again, Tanya, it was awesome. And with that, I'll shut things down. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel, listeners. If you follow, make sure you subscribe. And where can people find you on Twitter, Tanya?
Oh, I'm at She Hacks Purple on every platform that will let me do. So on LinkedIn, I'm Tanya Janka, but everywhere else, I'm She Hacks Purple. So awesome. If you look that up, I'll be there.
Cool. And I'll put all the stuff in the show notes, as well as a link to your team and what you're doing and everything that we talked about here. So with that, I'll talk to you guys next time. And again, thank you so much.
right, we are back. Next up, we've got Devops Unbound, one of our ongoing series here on TechStrong TV. This one is titled Leveraging DevOps Dojos and Centers of Excellence. And in this one, Alan Schimmel and Mitch Ashley, who are the hosts, they are joined by Larry Macaroni from Contrast Security and Sharon Alvarez from Salesforce, and they talk about the benefits of the DevOps Dojos and Centers of Excellence and ways in which you can create your own DevOps dojo. Lots of takeaways in this presentation, this conversation. Let's go ahead and roll it now.
Hey everyone, I'm Alan Schimmel, and welcome to another Devops Unbound. For those of you not familiar, Devops Unbound is a bi-weekly video series where we discuss and try to take a little bit of a deeper dive into different aspects of DevOps and different questions and theories and practices around DevOps. We're very, very proud to be affiliated with our friends at Tricentis, who have sponsored Devops Unbound since day one. It's been coming up on 2 years now, and couldn't ask for a better partner and sponsor for us on Devops Unbound here as we go where no video show's gone before on DevOps, right? We hit just about everything we think our audience would like to talk about. And speaking of that, we actually have a topic that I think you are going to like today. I should mention, though, that in addition to these for this particular format that you're going to see today, which is our panel format, we also do a monthly Devops Unbound Roundtable with a live audience. So you out there watching this get to participate and drive the discussion. That's not the format for today, but we will have one again coming up in another 2 weeks or so. And I encourage you to sign out for that and become part of the Devops Unbound experience. It's actually a lot of fun. So for today's Devops Unbound, though, we're going to take a look at the whole question of, how we disseminate DevOps in an organization. There's been a lot written and spoken about it. There's been many sessions at conferences. I've had the pleasure of listening and learning from several people. But DevOps has presented us with sort of a unique path, a unique road on how do we go organization-wide in DevOps. DevOps almost invariably starts with little bubbles of DevOps, I call them, at enterprises, right? Small teams who adopt some DevOps ways. And then, if they succeed, or sometimes even if they don't, that builds momentum within an organization. And more of the teams do DevOps. But at some point, you want to bring all that disparate learning, you want to bring all these disparate teams together, and you want to start setting down your emerging practices, your best practices on how we do DevOps. And it's taken many forms at organizations. We've had things like DevOps Dojos. We've had internal DevOps days as part of DevOps Dojos kind of things. We've had centers of excellence. We've had communities practice. I messed that up, but Sharon will correct me shortly. There's been a lot of ways to skin the cat, right? I don't know if one way is necessarily the best way. I think your mileage varies by the organization, but we're going to jump into all of that today. To do it, I couldn't think of some better people than our folks today we have on board. Let me introduce you now to our panel for today. First of all, I'm so happy to see him. I'm going to see him in person in June at our RSA Devsecops event. He's a fixture there. He's with a different company now than the last time I saw him there, but that was 3 years ago. Larry Mascherone. Larry, how are you, man?
I'm doing great, Alan. Thanks for having me here. Great. And I look forward to seeing you and the whole, everyone from the community at RSA. That'll be great.
Larry, why don't you give folks a little bit of your background?
Sure. So as you mentioned, I'm work with a new company, Contrast Security. But before that, I launched and scaled for 5 years the DevOps Transformation Program, or Devsecops Transformation Program, depending upon how you think of it, at Comcast, the large conglomerate for telecommunications. Comcast, 600 different development teams, 10,000 developers were the target audience for ours. And we did it in something borrowing from Dojos with coaching, but a little more like a community of practice, in that the folks that we were working with were also contributing to the content and the evolution of the program.
Excellent. Joining Larry and I is Sharon Alvarez. Sharon, welcome to Devops Unbound.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me, Alan and Mitch. I'm really, really excited. Yeah, thank you so much. I'm very fond of all the events we're organizing, and so Devops Unbound, the roundtables, and so on. So fantastic.
Thank you for joining us. Sharon, why don't you give folks a little bit of your background?
Yeah, so I have been in the Agile space for nearly almost 15 years now. I've led significant transformations. First, I started in France, where I work with Alcoa fastening system. I have a puppy in the background, so you may hear him. And in Seattle, I led some significant transformations with larger corporations such as Amazon, Expedia, Microsoft. I've been focused on Agile and DevOps. So like Larry, I had an opportunity to set up actually some DevOps Agile and DevOps Dojo. And in fact, I'm starting out with an Agile Dojo right now at Salesforce. Yeah, I'm working with Salesforce right now in Agile delivery.
Excellent. Okay, then our fourth member today is my co-host and partner and friend, Mitchell Ashley. Hey, Mitchell, great to see you. Why don't you introduce yourself?
You bet. Hey, Alan. Hi, Larry. Hi, Sharon. What a great panel. I can't wait to hear from you all. My name is Mitch Ashley. I'm CTO with TechStrong Group and also principal with TechStrong Research, and having gone through my own couple of DevOps transformations. Have to be transparent and say we didn't get to use a dojo at that time. So I'm fascinated and want to learn, just like our audience too. So, but I am have been passionate about learning organizations. And that's a lot of what we talk about with Centers of Excellence and dojos and things like that. So how do we create a community of learning? So I think it'll be a fascinating discussion.
Absolutely. So let's dive into it, guys. I gave my 2 cents, right? I think for whatever reason, DevOps and DevOps and Agile, for that matter, have lend themselves really well to these concepts of, in an internal methodology, an internal process of learning, of sharing. Because I think dojos and centers of excellence and community practices are as much about sharing as they are about learning. It's a two-way street. Why DevOps and Agile? What makes them so special that this emerges the way to do these things?
The opening line of the Agile Manifesto is essentially learning by doing. And so you have to have both the learning and the doing, right? It's evolving your practice based upon feedback from evidence from earlier executions of the same thing. And so you have to be doing it. So I personally am an active developer, write code every day, author of a dozen open source projects, one of which gets 1 million downloads a month. So not trivial size projects here. And I'm practicing DevOps and DevSecOps and Agile as I go, and Kanban as I go. And that's evolving the way I think to ever better ways of doing it.
Sharon, what?
Yeah, this is fantastic, Larry. And that's a really good question, Alan. I think one of the struggle as a lot of organizations are trying to adopt, Agile, DevOps, DevSecOps, is the upskilling piece, right? We have to upskill and then scale. And then there's the return on investment on training and time spent in training, in instructor-led training, for example. And we know that those are not very effective today. We know that this is not effective. It's not actually how developers learn. And so recurring to format models such as the DevOps Dojo, Agile, Project Engineering DevOps Dojo, I like to not focus only on DevOps, is a really, really good way not only to upskill, to learn, get also feedback, on how transformation leaders can do better at scaling and fostering that learning. But it's also a really great way to get engagements. Developers, product teams, they rather spend 6 to 8 weeks working on projects that are really meaningful to them than sitting in a classroom and doing a boot camp. So I think this is a great way to introduce Agile and DevOps in an organization.
Absolutely.
I think too, Alan, also both Agile and DevOps, they're not about technologies. They're not about tools. Yes, they're supporting tools. It's about how we do things. And I think what's really part of why it's caught on so much is that it's not like the old waterfall methodologies where the methodology got put in some binder and we referred to it and we were ready to go to the next phase. It's about how teams and individuals work together and collaborate together to produce something on a much shorter interval. And so there's a lot of learning that happens very quickly. So it's not just about learning; it's happening fast. I mean, you learn every iteration of a Scrum meeting or a sprint, or as we're setting up a CI/CD pipeline and delivering code. So we can increment and learn much faster with these techniques. So it's really fascinating to watch.
I think another theme that follows all the way from Agile to today is around breaking down silos. So, and this isn't the only thing that Agile did, but to a large degree, Agile essentially said, okay, well, quality, we're not going to throw it over the wall to a QA department anymore. The development team is going to be at least partially responsible and more wholly responsible for the quality of the products they produce. And on the other end, product management, they become more actively involved in that, with the role of the product owner essentially being part of the development team to a lesser degree. Then you move on to the DevOps movement and the cloud native movement, and they were really about breaking down the silos between the development team and IT ops. And so that, again, the development team does more of that work now, not all of it. And then the role of those folks shifts more to being toolsmithing. Same thing with Devsecops. The security group was a throw it over the wall function, still is largely at a lot of organizations. And nowadays, though, developers with shift left security and dev first security are being asked to take a bigger role in securing the products that they're developing. And I think this breaking down of silos allows the learning to be holistic, instead of it to be just, hey, I do my job QA and I do my job development. Now I have to develop in a way that results in high quality. And so you get more holistic decision making. So the learning is got a broader scope and isn't just one silo at a time, which makes it much more optimized for the thing that's the most important for you at that given moment in time.
I would say to that, though, Larry, is we won't be successful if we just keep throwing straws on the developers' backs, because eventually the camel's back breaks, right? I think rather than thinking of them as developer teams, we need to think of them as agile teams and DevOps teams. And it's not just what we think of as developers as part of those teams. The security guy's part of that team now. He's not on the other side of the wall.
Exactly. I actually say
not only he didn't have to climb the wall, we opened the door for him.
Yeah. I actually say engineering teams now, but
engineering teams, good.
Rather than development teams most of the time. But the point is, though, I think if you say engineering teams and people don't actually behave like one team, they just say, oh, we're a team. And we collaborate, we talk, we hug each other every once in a while. That doesn't work. That's just sort of lip service to it. You actually have to operate as
right. You got to operate as a team. It's team with a capital T, not a small T.
Exactly.
And and shout out to our Tricenter sponsors, right? The Q&A folks. I mean, Q&A and testing professionals having given way to developers, they've become part of those engineering teams and taken their rightful place in there. Automation helps, right? Automation helps, but it's not by and in of itself. Anyway, I want to jump, if you don't mind a little bit, I want to shift a little bit, right? So I look at this and I say, okay, you look at things like ITSM and IDLE. You didn't have this kind of thing going on there. There, you took your courses from some corporate trainer. You got certified. I mean, with Agile, you can be, your Scrum certification or whatever, and that kind of. But there's more to it than that in Agile. Where in IDLE and ITSM, that was it. With Agile DevOps, in that continuum, we've seen, as we've said, community practices, Center of Excellence, Dojo. For our audience, what's the difference? What are these different things, and why do we care? Why don't we? Why aren't they all the same? Sharon, I know you have strong opinions, Center of Excellence versus community practice. What's the difference to you?
Yeah. You all shared some really amazing and on-point feedback, by the way, earlier. I run on those later, but to answer your question, Alan, you're right. So the dojo is a very different experience. I want to say it's literally an experience for teams. But between the Center of Excellence and the Committee of Practice, the challenge and maybe the pitfalls of a Center of Excellence, they are highly centralized. They are set up by an organization. They are led by directors. They have a specific teams, and that teams develop templates, and we try to, roll out or standardize those templates across an organization. So it's not owned by the employees. We can definitely, provide feedback, introduce templates and models and so on. But it's more centralized. And the Committee of Practices, I want to explain the difference, actually, what it leads to. The Committee of Practices are generally more employee-owned, so it's really a community owned by, you could have a Committee of Practice for architects. You could have a Committee of Practices, in fact, for testers, a little bit like the guilds. You could even have something for, security, availability, and so on. And so they really shape, they define the community of practice, so they have more freedom. And the benefit, it's because when you have a community of practice, it's a lot more sustainable. People can come and go, but you have some sort of sustainability across the organization. It doesn't break, it doesn't lose its momentum when a director, leaves the Center of Excellence. We have a new leadership and so on. So which is the Center of Excellence may take a new directions or may stop as well. But the community of practices are more organic, and I like this aspect. I did an interview with Nicole Force-Grain. I think it was in 2019, it's published on InfoQ, where she actually explained beautifully the difference between the Center of Excellence and Community of Practice. And I very much agree with her, yeah.
Fair. Thoughts?
Yeah, so I focus less on sort of the definition of the and we really have talked about, I think, 4 different things at this point: Dojo, Center of Excellence, Community of Practice, and Guild. And I would say they're sort of on the spectrum from really intense, immersive to lighter touch, I guess, and maybe those last 2 could be swapped depending upon how you define them. But so the program I put together at Comcast borrowed from the dojo concept, in that there is a coach dedicated to each individual development team, but we didn't take them out of doing their own work. We essentially coached them in place. So just like a basketball team or a baseball team or a football team that's playing games every week, you don't have time to sort of say, take them out. We're going to take you out of the league for a few weeks and train you intensely. No, we're going to coach you every week and learn by doing. And so we we had this concept of a gradual on-ramp, and we centrally defined the list of practices that development teams should all be striving towards, but that was contributed completely by the community. So in that sense, it was a community of practice. But the coaches that were employed by my program would meet with each individual development team, and the list of practices were essentially prioritized by the best bang for the buck. And we'd start with the top 5, 6, 10, and we'd talk about them with the team, not just sort of say, this is a survey, are you doing it or not? And we're going to check you off or mark you down. It's not red, amber, green. It's what do you think about this? And do you understand what it means? And what would it take for you guys to actually, or gals, to actually adopt this practice and make it produce value for our company? And as soon as we got to 2 or 3 of these items that they weren't doing at the value delivery level, the full cultural level, we call that, we stopped the gap analysis. We didn't need to talk to them about the other 30 practices because, we're just going to say, okay, these are the top ones. Let's make a plan and a commitment in the next 90 days for you to adopt those to the point of delivering value. And then we would help them over the next 90 days. And then we come back and they might pick we do another little workshop and they might pick another 2 or 3 practices to adopt. So at this point, it takes about 1.5 years for a team to get from wherever they are, low levels of maturity, to sometimes very high levels of maturity of DevOps and DevSecOps.
I'm curious too. One of the observations I have is sometimes it's what the organization is kind of used to working with. If you already have centers of excellence or community of practice or some way you've established those kinds of not functions, but sort of built into the DNA of the organization. Seems like take advantage of that. If you already are a community of practice organization, go build on it. If you're centers of excellence, go build on it. It seems like a good way to get started. Agree?
Yeah, I very much agree with everything you said, Alan, as well. I think you touched on it when we talked about Larry, when you mentioned we learn and we do, and we learn as we do. So I think we forget often to apply an iterative and incremental approach to actually all of those models, right? So the DevOps Dojo has to evolve based on feedback that we're receiving, based on engagement, based, on the return on investment and so on. And same for the Center of Excellence and Committee of Practice. In all of the dojos and Committee of Practice that I set up, I had to adjust, based on engagement, based on the feedback and so on. So I think as long as we adopt this iterative and we listen, to the audience, we listen to what people are saying and what they need, I think we can be successful no matter what format we're using. I very much agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah. So Mitchell, similar to Sharon, at Comcast, when I started, there was the concept of a guild was in place a little bit, and the concept of a center of excellence was in place a little bit. The center of excellence for Agile, though, was considered a failure by a lot of the engineering groups. And when I looked at sort of why, the engineering folks felt like it became a navel-gazing organization where the Agile experts all hung out there, and they didn't actually sort of participate actively with the development groups, and they weren't focused on true Agile. It was a lot of cargo cult Agile, where we're going through the motions. But yeah, we have daily stand-ups, but they're not getting the full value out of adopting Agile. And so I sort of had some baggage associated with those. So I didn't name my program either of those two things intentionally, just to sort of avoid that.
Yeah, it seems, I know one of the things that can happen with us too is it can become sort of the voice from on high, right? The elitist sort of. Of course, people hate that. They don't want to go talk to the monks of the whatever the practice is. It seems like that's the dojo, the boot camp, the workshop. It's the hands-on, do it together, learn by doing practice under whatever scenario you want to call it that works best for people.
And I think it does because it's very centered on the challenges that those product engineering teams are trying to solve. Whereas oftentimes Center of Excellence, I do agree with what you said, Larry. Sometimes I know it's a story at Comcast, but I have seen similar patterns in other organizations where the Center of Excellence operate more like a project management type of a PMO. It operates more like a PMO. And it feels often disconnected from the challenges, the constraints of teams, product engineering teams. And that's where I was that's the difference I was pointing between, COE and COPs. And with the DevOps, with the Dojos, I think it's completely different, because the approach is not about, it's not so much top down. We really start with the teams. We start with their challenges. There's no charter to focus on and scale something, but the focus is really to look at the concerns that the teams have. They come with their challenges, and we help them solve their challenges. So I think that's a huge difference between Dojos and Center of Excellence, or even COPs. COPs, we can make it center on the challenges that we have better than with a Center of Excellence.
Fair to say that more of a not purely, but more of a bottoms-up approach as opposed to passing knowledge on from on high.
Yeah, very much agree. And Larry, I want to say something. You talked about, you all talked about breaking down the silos, and so I think the Dojo is a fantastic place. I used to name it a value stream dojo. The reason why it's because I work with people who, for example, BMW presented at the Devops Enterprise Summit in 2019. And when they presented, they actually shared a little bit of information. Fantastic video, by the way, it's posted on YouTube. They shared a little bit of information about how they called it Biz DevOps Dojo, because they wanted to include the business, they wanted to include product folks, and they wanted to include UX. So they all work together within the dojo with the engineering team towards an improvement, towards an initiative, actually something that was meaningful to them. And I love this approach, and that's really what I'm trying to do in all of the dojo. And so I try to include, right now I call it Agile Dojo, but the objective is to make sure that we include the product team, UX, we have documentation teams as well. So I love this approach, and I love to call it value stream. Yeah, we have a new guest on the show.
You're going to have to introduce your new guest here.
From the dojo.
But I love the idea of calling it value stream, and because it really is a value stream. A value stream is essentially a set of steps that you go through to deliver value for your organization. It includes product, thinking about the market and UX, and all the way to getting it in the user's hands. One key concept that I think is really comes out when you start talking about a value stream is this idea from the theory of constraints. And so, just to explain this for the audience, is think of it, it's not exactly, and some experts don't like me using this analogy, but think of the weakest link, right? So if you have a chain and you improve the strength of any one link in that chain, the overall chain is not going to get stronger unless the link you improved was previously the weakest link. And then the chain gets stronger. Well, the theory of constraints is similar, that in any value stream, there's one dominant choke point, essentially bottleneck, place where work gets backed up from, or loses its quality the most, or loses its effectiveness the most. In a value stream with humans and variation, it's not like a chain where it's always one link. It shifts around a little bit. So it's a statistical problem, not an actual single point. But the same idea holds true. And Gene Kim says this very explicitly in his writing, the Phoenix Project. He's got the 3 ways of DevOps. Flow is the first one. Feedback is the second one, and experimentation and learning is the third one, which we've already touched on. But flow is essentially all about the theory of constraints. And he summarizes it, that improvements made anywhere but at the bottleneck are an illusion. And basically you can be doing good things elsewhere in the value stream. Maybe QA is not the bottleneck, but they're doing good things improving it, or security is not the bottleneck, but they're doing good things improving it. And it doesn't improve the overall ability of the organization to deliver value because they weren't the bottleneck at that moment in time.
Yeah, I like the visual of, if you aren't working on the constraint, the bottleneck, anything ahead of it basically is making more stuff arrive at the bottleneck faster. That's not helpful. Or if you're working on anything after it, you're making those more efficient, so they're sitting in a wait state with nothing to do because you're still waiting on the stuff from the bottleneck, and the bottleneck always moves. So as soon as you've addressed that, the next thing pops up as the next place to work usually. So it's a great visual. I'm curious, both of you have such great experience doing centers of excellence and community practice and dojos. Are there some common lessons you've seen, 2 or 3 kind of things you've picked up along the way? Usually this is a challenge that we experience here. Usually this is a progression that we go through, having done it a few times or more than a few times. Sharon, any thoughts that you've seen kind of over time?
Yeah, I don't think it has to be over-engineered when we start. I used to think that we need a charter, we need to set expectations and so on. And I don't think it's the case. Right now, I'm starting something very scrappy, organically, and I want to see interest, how people are going to come into the dojo and use it. And the other thing, I think it's really important to tell success stories continuously in order to drive engagement. So the dojo is going to be the place where people come. We don't voluntold. We don't want to impose it on people. We want them to to see the value and come with their challenges and work with us, right? So in order to make that successful, to make that happen, it's really important to tell the success stories. So when a team comes into the dojo, we need to clearly understand the challenges, document that. And when they leave the dojo, it's really important to share the success stories. That could be metrics, that could be a story, but it's important that could be a video, but it's really important to support them, show them recognize the investment that they've done while they came to the dojo. So one thing that I'm doing right now, I have several programs for the dojo, and for each time I have belts, badges, and belts. So I love having a system that recognizes the investment in learning, actually. So that's something that I've learned over time.
Yeah, so I love what you said there, Sharon. It feels like organic evolution of the program, whatever you call it, is important. So it's sort of like being agile about developing an agile program or a DevOps program or a Devsecops program. So I really do like that. So for me, I have 2 other lessons learned, although that one would have been one of my 3. The first one is we've touched on it a little bit already, is to not let the folks who just care about the subject matter of whatever it is, Agile or DevOps or DevSecOps, the second DevSecOps or QA take over and really have the folks who care about delivering value. And it was centered around the development team, which has now been expanded to be a more engineering team, as Alan was saying earlier. The other thing I have as a lesson learned, which Sharon said, we all know that instructor-based training is not effective. Well, I didn't know that when I started my program at Comcast, and I had to learn it the hard way. It is to focus on this idea of contextual learning instead of instructor-based learning. And so there's 3 pillars of contextual learning. The first one is that it has to be important to the work you're currently doing, situated. And so like providing feedback to a developer in the pull request, because they're trying to get their work accepted into the product with the pull request. They're going to pay a very close attention to any feedback, and they're going to do the learning deeply get the learning deeply because of that. Social, and Sharon touched on this also, is that you have to spread the word, you have to reward folks for it. The pull request actually provides a social positive reinforcement because their peers get to see that their code got accepted into the next higher level branch. But things like gamification and leaderboards and parties for the person. There was one business unit leader who challenged another business leader unit to have the most maturity improvement in their engineering teams. And then the loser was going to have to wear an Easter bunny outfit to work during the season, at the end of the 90-day period, and then distributed as the third pillar of contextual learning, meaning that the organization really supports the value of this learning. And so I really have shifted to everything is contextual learning, nothing instructor led, nothing video based. It's all got to be basically just in time learning.
It's awesome, Larry. I love it. It gave me so many great ideas. And maybe the last thing I want to say, make it as inclusive as possible. Like I said, include UX, include not just the core engineering team, but, product teams, and make it as inclusive as possible to make it more, effective. And yeah.
Great. Well, we have a few minutes left, so I'm going to give you a little bit of a chance to think about how you want to answer this last question. Curious about resources. We talked about learning within organizations. How about learning from each other outside? What are some maybe really great resources? It can be anything from books to Slack or groups or whatever. Are there any that either one of you might recommend to someone in our audience who's kind of looking for that next place to go, learn more, help bring that back into their organization? Whoever wants to go first.
If I understood your question, Mitch, is what are the other opportunities of learning? Is that right?
What resources might you have to go learn more about doing a dojo or a community? Where can I learn from in addition to watching Devops Unbound? Yeah.
So this is a really good question because, how do you start a DevOps Dojo? So there are a few really good now. It's getting traction, and there are a few good resources on YouTube. My go-to resource is the DevOps Enterprise Summit and the Dojo Consortium. So they have a site, Target as a site as well. And the DevOps Enterprise Summit published a lot of videos on DevOps Dojo. There's probably close to 10 videos right now. So I watch them on a regular basis. I've done a panel with Helen Beale and Brian Finster and Eric Chapman. It's published on a Bright Talk. It's a 1 hour like ours, actually. And we cover the question, how to set up a dojo, what's a DevOps dojo, how do we measure it, what do we need to do to make it successful, and so on. So it's a really good Bright Talk recording. And there are few books, so I don't remember the titles on top of my mind, but if we look on Amazon.com, I think there are at least 2 to 3 really good references. But I recommend the videos on YouTube. They're fantastic because they are actually real life examples of what works and what didn't work.
Yeah, so I'm going to take a little different angle because I don't know of any resources off the top of my head that are specifically about establishing a dojo or a center of excellence. So I'm going to say, sort of as a foundation, I really love Gene Kim's approach to thinking about DevOps. So really don't just read it, but fetch that and sort of really deeply internalize the 3 ways and sort of like how you would actually implement those and how would you inject those? How would you encourage those to form in the culture of your organization? That would be sort of my biggest recommendation for that. Nicole Forsgren's Accelerate, and I know there were a couple other authors on that book, but or at least one other. Gene Kim might have. Yeah, Gene Kim, I think, was actually a co-author of that, but it's really Nicole's work. So that's a good one, and there's a measurement framework in there that I would take it with a little bit of a grain of salt because I think that some of the things that if she had a chance to sort of do the research now, she's learned since that book was published herself even. And I think in particular, a couple of the things she measured were good, but there are better ones nowadays. But it's still a great book about being methodical about your feedback in particular. And that's really where I think the big contribution from Nicole is. There's a book, there's a couple of books, volume 1, volume 2. There might have even been a volume 3. I'm not sure, of the epic failures of DevOps and DevSecOps that was published at the, as Alan and I were talking, it released at the RSA conference 2 years in a row. I have a chapter in volume 2 there, but it's really stories about how people made mistakes and learned from them. Again, learning by doing is the theme of this whole conversation. And so I would point to those series of books as well. They're on Amazon as well.
Excellent.
And this is great. And Mitch and Larry, something simple. Reach out to people who've done it. Because you talked about Gene approach, and Gene approach is very much about communities, conferences, and reach out to people. So reach out to us if you're looking at setting up a dojo or a community of practice. You don't know how to go about it. Just reach out to us, and we'd be happy to help you.
Yeah, and along those lines, I'm starting a new organization, transformation.dev. If you go there, there's not much there yet. There's one blog post and about flow, about theory of constraints, which we already mentioned. And there's a sign-up sheet to sort of join that community and help contribute to, and sort of like a community of practice, but not bound within a single organization, is the idea behind transformation.dev.
Yep, transformation.dev. Excellent. Well, we are all out of time, so I'll just give one analogy to wrap things up. As much as I love to watch Bob Ross shows about him painting, there's a difference between watching him and the peacefulness of it to picking up that brush, giving it a try, and trying some things. And that's what we're talking about with centers of excellence and dojos and all that, and helping each other learn from that. So pick up a brush and start painting your dojo and enjoy it, and reach out to people like Sharon and Larry and so many others on all the great resources. So thank you so much to you both. I feel like we've kind of stepped in halftime in the game, and you guys are all stepping back onto the court, or back to painting, or whatever you're doing, and back to doing your work. And we appreciate you taking the time to share so much knowledge and expertise with everybody.
Well, thank you for having me. It's great. Yeah.
Thank you for having us. Yeah, absolutely.
You bet. And thank you to our great friends at Tricentis for sponsoring Devops Unbound. Thank you, all of you, for joining us today. Alan will be back with us next time. I think he's off building his dojo. He'll be back, and we'll see you all soon.
All right, we are back. Next up, we've got our Something Old segment. This is from the recent Secure Software Summit. I think we held it in January. This is a presentation by Dan Lorank, who is with ChainGuard Inc. His presentation is titled Risk and Reward, the State of Open Source Supply Chain Security, talking about all the bad things that have happened with respect to open source software and the security especially along the software supply chain, and then some of the things that's happening in the industry right now to alleviate the issue, including a Sig Store in Toto, the update framework, and the Open SSF, all of the different open source initiatives that have recently come to light to help mitigate the problem. It's a great presentation. There's a lot of really great takeaways in this one, so I do encourage you to check it out. Let's roll it now.
Hey everyone, my name is Dan Lawrence, and I'm going to be talking about risk and reward, the state of open source software supply chain security. That's a bit of a mouthful. I'm currently the founder and CEO of a startup called ChainGuard, where we're focused on supply chain security and solving a lot of these problems. So this is a topic very near and dear to my heart. My email and Twitter are down at the bottom, where I tweet about a lot of these topics pretty frequently. So here's the agenda we're going to cover today. A couple quick topics. We're going to start out by talking about the state of open source security in general. Open source software is part of everyone's supply chain, whether they know it or not. So understanding the security of open source software is pretty critical to understanding the broader supply chain security problems that we're facing. Not every problem in the supply chain security space is relevant to open source software. And in a lot of ways, open source software kind of gets unfairly maligned for a lot of things. Every time there's an open source software attack, people tend to panic and talk about the problems with open source software. Not all problems here are specific to open source software. So I'm going to kind of break these apart and show that a lot of these problems would happen with closed source software as well. But some of these things are specific to the way open source software is developed in the open. And key to understanding how to fix those is understanding the problems themselves. So I'll break that down a little bit and show how open source is good and bad when it comes to improving supply chain security. And then not all hope is lost. I'm going to hopefully give some good news here at the end. We're going to start out by talking about the problems and scariness, but I'm going to point to some efforts going on today to help improve this for everyone. And then some links at the very end on how you can get involved with some of these initiatives if you're interested yourself. So this is the first scary slide, the chart going up and to the right. If you've been paying attention to security in the software space or open source software at all in the last year, this probably isn't news to you. This report came out from Sonatype in their 2021 State of the Supply Chain report. But we're seeing a whole bunch of new, Sonatype refers to them as next generation software supply chain attacks over the last 5 or 6 years. They're happening across all different language ecosystems. They're happening across all different types of software, and they're happening pretty frequently today. This includes things like typo squatting, which is where somebody might register a domain name or upload a package with a typo in it or a slightly misconfigured hyphen, something like that, to try to trick people into installing a malicious version of a package. Malicious code injection is another type of attack here that they treat as next generation software supply chain attacks. This can happen a bunch of different ways, usually like an install script or something like that when you first install a package, downloading and injecting some malicious code that makes it harder to find. Tool tampering is the final one represented here, and this is especially hard to find. This happens when your tools, you get compromised version of your tools that inject bad behavior to the code they're compiling or inside of a build system or something like that. These are especially hard to find. And as you can see kind of in this chart, 5 or 6 years ago, this wasn't happening at all, really. But the reports have shown that it's dramatically on the rise, especially in the last year. Almost every month, we've seen a new attack affect a widespread open source package. So things are starting to get pretty scary here. And thankfully, people are noticing. From that same, actually, this is a different report. This is the Anchor 2021 report on this, where companies, CISOs, and leaders in security out of organizations were surveyed. Last year alone in 2021, 64% of organizations reported that they were affected by a software supply chain attack. 36% said no. I'm guessing that they asked the wrong person or the person misunderstood the question or something like that. These have affected almost everyone. And even if you weren't affected directly by one of these security problems, you probably spent weeks checking to make sure that you weren't, because open source software is so pervasive. Finally, this might be good or bad depending on your perspective, but because of all of these attacks hitting critical infrastructure, regulations are coming. In the wake of the famous breach of SolarWinds that happened toward the very end of 2020, there's actually an executive order in the United States from the Biden administration this May, directing a bunch of different government agencies and the private sector to work together to improve the nation's cybersecurity. This was a long executive order that directed agencies to start to come up with real recommendations. So of course, it didn't specify exactly what we have to do directly in here to improve security, but it did set some very tight timelines that these various organizations are working toward. A lot of these regulations include things like SBOMs or software bill of materials. You might have heard that word come out of this executive order, which can be thought of as like a nutrition label on food. Right? Software bill of materials would be required from vendors to explain what dependencies, what third-party packages come with a piece of software, so that organizations using that can take that knowledge into account during purchasing and during patching and maintenance programs. There are a bunch of other things in here. regarding setting aside some funding for open source. A bunch of different large companies have promised money to help improve the situation as well. There's also been work from NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technology, to set up different reference architectures and recommendations for how software should be built and delivered to do so in a secure framework. So a lot of these things are still rolling out today. The executive order isn't done yet, and the recommendations are finally just starting to hit. So these regulations are coming, whether you know about them or not. They're probably going to affect you and your business if you're in the practice of selling software in the coming years. So why is open source under attack here, and why are we calling out open source in particular? Like I said before, supply chain security is about open source security. You can't really separate the two. Open source is in everyone's supply chain. This is from another survey, the Sonatype survey. 98% of code bases contain open source code in their audits. Again, I think that's probably an underestimate. It's a huge number, but I think it's probably an underestimate. I think the other 2% here were like that, the fifth dentist that didn't recommend the toothpaste. They must have misunderstood or didn't understand what open source software was. It's everywhere. It's pretty much impossible to build code today from scratch without using open source in some manner. Of that, though, on the flip side, 92% of these code bases contained outdated or vulnerable code. All code is vulnerable eventually. The code that we don't see vulnerabilities in today is just the code that they haven't been found in yet. The longer you look at something, the more likely it is to find a vulnerability. So just because something is secure when you started using it doesn't mean it is still secure. And this is a common problem plaguing organizations that are using open source software today. It's all over their code bases. They didn't keep track when they started using it, and they forgot to update it, which leaves them vulnerable now. Some famous attacks have happened this way. The Equifax breach from several years ago, based on an outdated version of Apache struts. This happens constantly where people forget to update software to pick up patches for vulnerabilities. So it's everywhere, it's getting old, and it's getting outdated and vulnerable. And organizations are now facing the burden of having to start maintaining and updating these packages. And the second reason that this is open source security is critical here is because supply chains are really about the links between organizations. And this is what attackers are having so much fun with today. If you're trying to attack a single organization, you have to get through their perimeter defenses. But if you attack a supply chain, it's usually much easier because you're attacking the gap between those companies, between those organizations. You're going after the points that are less secured in the middle. You're going after package managers rather than secure cloud environments. You're going after distribution networks. You're going after the way people install, update, and look for new versions of things. Right? We need to make sure that these links are strong. Nobody can solve this on their own because it's about how we communicate together. And this is why open source and standards play such a critical role here. So now we can kind of zoom in and look at the specific challenges for open source security. Now that hopefully I've convinced you that open source security does affect your supply chain. And it's pretty easy, right? It's right here in the name. There are a few things unique about open source software. The first one is that it's open, right? This means anybody can see the code, anybody can contribute to the code. This is great in a lot of ways. Linus Torvalds is famous for saying, many eyeballs make all bugs shallow. And that's one of the big benefits to improving security in open source software. The more people that can look at things, the more likely it is that bugs are going to get found. But this doesn't always work out, and it actually has some downsides that I'll explain. The second one here is that it's free, right? Most open source software, and the reason it's so commonly used and developed so widely and has made its way into organizations all over the world is because it's free in most cases. Open source software comes with a specific set of licenses that guarantee your ability to use it in specific ways. And that's awesome. It's much easier than having to go through a procurement process to get a piece of software licensed to use internally. But again, sometimes free isn't worth it. This isn't worth the cost. We'll go through a couple examples here too. And then finally, it's transparent, right? If there are issues, you should be able to look at them and you should be able to find them because you can audit all of the code. Unfortunately, the quantity of open source software out there today makes that pretty much impossible, going back to Linus's law again, about many eyeballs. If you're using millions and tens of millions of lines of code, you don't really have time to look at each one of them and look for vulnerabilities. And we know how easy it is for vulnerabilities to sneak by, even if you are looking for them. So a lot of this transparency can just be an illusion depending on how you look at it. Let's go through some examples of each of these. So I like to use a lot of memes in my presentations. So this is the first one. Because open source software is open and anybody can contribute to it, that's great, right? Until you realize that not everybody on the internet is nice. Anybody that's spent time on forums or social media probably recognizes this. A lot of people do not have everyone's best intentions out there. And when you're taking code and running it in production environments with access to sensitive data, that can actually be pretty terrifying. People go through background checks and audits to work at companies where they get access to these environments. But anybody with a GitHub account can go and contribute code to critical libraries, which then make their way in there. Right? This is awesome in a lot of ways, like I said, but it can also be pretty terrifying, and it is really inviting for attackers. Malicious code commits happen pretty frequently. Libraries get taken over, packages get transferred to different owners that don't have everyone's best intentions in mind. There was a pretty famous incident middle of 2021, where some researchers from the University of Minnesota were trying to show how easy it is to sneak malicious code into the Linux kernel. They did this, the project was called Hypocrite Commits, where they sent some patches with known vulnerabilities in them to see if they would get through. Fortunately, the Linux kernel review process is pretty strong, and they actually caught a lot of these before making their way in. But nonetheless, I think a few commits did make it in, and they were eventually reverted. And because the style of the experiment was set up where people weren't warned ahead of time, the University of Minnesota got kind of sanctioned and in some trouble for doing this. This happens all the time, though, in other ecosystems, packages, and communities where attackers are doing it not with everyone's best intentions in mind and not for research. So it's something to keep your eye on. This happens in a bunch of other cases too, beyond just the hypocrite commits. There's a famous example of a Chrome plugin called the Great Suspender, which was an awesome plugin that would suspend tabs running in the background. If you're one of those people that collects hundreds and hundreds of tabs, this plugin could save your battery life. The person maintaining it handed it off to somebody else, who immediately took the code down from GitHub and started inserting malware into the plugin. So the code changed from a kind of benevolent contributor to a malicious one overnight, and got malware pushed to people's browsers all around the world. Thankfully, the Chrome store took it down pretty quickly, but there are examples like this happening constantly. All right, moving on to the next bullet about transparency, starting again with another meme, right? Open source software is transparent. It is usually distributed in source form, and you can find the GitHub repository for all of the code that you're using. Look through the code and audit it again if you want to. But like I said, the vast volume of it makes this impractical in reality. Additionally, a lot of the code is distributed not in source form the way it's actually consumed. So even if you look at the source code for a Python or Node.js package, when you run pip install or npm install, you're actually grabbing a package form which has been compiled. And in a lot of these cases, there's no guarantee that the package actually came from the source code you audited. So depending on how you consume source code, if you're not actually grabbing the source code yourself and compiling it from scratch every single time, then a lot of the transparency can be an illusion. You might be using binaries that have been tampered with or came from source code that wasn't in the repository at all. And we've seen a few cases of this one as well. With tampered builds, whether it was done on purpose or whether the build process was attacked. A couple famous examples of this earlier this year were the CodeCov breach. CodeCov is a free service for sharing code coverage, which kind of shows you the percentage of code that is covered by unit tests. This is super useful when maintaining open source projects. Their installer for CodeCov, though, was a bash script that was installed with curl pipe to bash inside of a CI system. This script itself got compromised and had some malware put in it that would steal secrets. So the build process here was actually tampered with and was exporting people's secrets to an attacker. A lot of those secrets, the secret tokens, access tokens, that kind of thing, could be used to publish packages to things like NPM or Maven Central and stuff like that. So the CodeCov breach itself was actually used as a pivot point to form another set of supply chain attacks where other builds could get tampered with. That's one of the other kind of tricky parts about supply chain attacks. Another famous one from last year, maybe it was late 2020, I can't remember the exact date, was the PHP server that was managing the source code repository for the upstream PHP project. Sorry. This was actually compromised and a couple commits were injected directly into the source code repository. Thankfully, it was detected pretty quickly. The commits were backed out, and then the server configuration was locked down and migrated to another host that could be more easily secured. This was a case where the source code itself was tampered with directly without bypassing the code review and bypassing the project review process. Similar thing happened to the server hosting kernel.org years and years and years ago for the Linux kernel. This was audited and no misbehavior is actually found, but an attacker could have done something in that time. This happens to projects quite frequently. It makes it hard to secure and make sure that the packages being built are actually distributed securely. Now, finally, this is what we started to see in the news in the last couple of weeks a lot during the Log4j vulnerabilities reported right at the end of 2021. Open source software is free. This makes it super easy to use and gives you a great distribution network as a maintainer. Unfortunately, sometimes free isn't worth it. Right? If organizations start depending on something and it becomes critical infrastructure, they might require security patches to be done quickly. They might require a whole bunch of extra work be done to get these packages up to compliance. Unfortunately, free comes with nothing, exactly like it sounds. In a lot of cases, this puts burden on maintainers that are doing things in their spare time, and the code might have been up to quality at one point, but hasn't been maintained in years. This sort of thing happens all the time, and sometimes free just isn't worth it here. If you need to get a patch in, if you need to get a vulnerability fixed, and there's nobody there anymore because everybody has jobs or needs to work to get paid, then you might not have permission to get these fixes merged. Something might get abandoned. This type of thing happens pretty frequently too, and is a hot topic every time there's a bug found in a critical piece of open source software. The Heartbleed attack from years ago was one of the first wake-up calls showing how much of the internet's critical infrastructure runs on volunteer work. And this happens every couple of years as a reminder and a wake-up call. The Log4j stuff a couple weeks ago, Log4Shell was the most recent one, but this happens a lot. There's a very popular Golang library for JWT parsing and authentication called JWT Go. This made its way into dependency trees across the entire Golang ecosystem, even in projects like Kubernetes. This was great until a vulnerability was found inside of it, and then it turned out that the maintainer was no longer around to merge fixes for it. This led to a bunch of chaos in the ecosystem where people were forking it different ways, applying different patches to fix the same bug. And it just led to sprawl in the dependency tree, where before there was one version of this library with a very small bus factor because it was just one maintainer. Shortly after that, there were 5 or 6 different competing versions with different patches for the same bug, making their way around the dependency tree. It took a while before a single one emerged and fixed the vulnerability for everyone. Heartbleed was the most famous one, again, like I just mentioned, but this type of thing happens across all languages all of the time. It's a pretty common refrain when it happens for people to cry out asking for companies to start funding the work. And there are programs like GitHub sponsors and different foundations providing benefits for maintainers to get paid for their work. But it's not easy, right? You can't just hand people money and get more secure code. A lot of people have full-time jobs and only have time to work on nights and weekends, and handing them a small check doesn't really work. This is a really challenging problem to get professional time, professional maintenance on the vast long tail of open source software out there. It's not as simple as just throwing money at the problem, as everyone should know. All right, time for the good news after all of the scary stuff that we just went through. Not all hope is lost, right? It's just software. We wrote it and got ourselves into this mess, so we should be able to get ourselves out of it now that attackers have found it. I think there are a couple exciting initiatives going on to help improve kind of all of these aspects: transparency, security, funding, everything. So let's go through a couple of these. The community, I think, is our biggest strength. First of all, the community is the open source community. These maintainers out there putting in their time and effort and sharing their work has made open source so pervasive across the industry and inside of everyone's supply chains. That means we can leverage that same community. We can leverage the same open source to start securing it. Right? This is a tweet from a couple months ago that got a bunch of jokes and funny responses back to it. But I think the core value is true here, right? Instead of each company needing to go build their own secure versions of all of these libraries, we can start to secure them once, find the critical ones that are being used by everyone, and improve, kind of lift the tide up for everyone at once. So leveraging the community here, we've got a couple different ongoing initiatives. The first one I mentioned, software bill of materials. This came up before when talking about regulations. But these really provide a couple different benefits when thinking about securing the open source ecosystem. One of the giant challenges is the lack of awareness or knowledge about which open source software is used where. Companies might not actually know if they're using something like Log4j or OpenSSL. They just know that they're consuming an application and they don't know what's inside of there. Providing this transparency is only going to help. People are going to realize which projects are critical and are running in these privileged environments and are making their way across the entire industry. And that can help feed extra funding efforts, like I'll talk about a little later, and audits and more proactive work to help make sure that these projects are maintained. To secure package managers and help audit supply chains to make sure they're not tampered with. There are a couple initiatives here as well. One of them that I'm going to cover a bit more is called Sig Store. This project has been around for about a year now under the Linux Foundation, and it's hoping to provide for open source maintainers what Let's Encrypt provided for web browsers over the last 5 years. Let's Encrypt made certificates free and automated to get, which helped lead to people adopting TLS across the web. Sig Store is aiming to do the same thing for code signing, so we can actually assert the provenance of source code and understand where it came from and make sure it hasn't been tampered with as it makes its way through package managers. And then finally, the funding problem. I said throwing money at the problem won't make it go away, but money is still necessary to fix a lot of these issues. So there are a couple different efforts to start making it easier to fund maintainers and get them the resources they need. And one of the most promising ones is the OpenSSF, the Open Source Security Foundation. So I'll talk about some of those sustainability efforts as well. Starting here, this is a high-level picture of what an SBOM might look like and is designed to contain. When you consume this application here all the way to the right, Acme application v1.1, right, as an end user, you don't know what's inside of there. You don't know that you're depending on Bingo, Buffer, or Carol's compression engine, which means even if you did want to help, if you did want to send patches, if you did want to audit or fund the maintainers, you wouldn't even know how to because you don't know that these are in use in the application that you're depending on. So by asking people to generate software bill of materials, by asking open source projects to provide one as well, by building better tooling to do this automatically throughout the build process, we're really going to get the transparency we need to understand which packages are critical so we can focus our resources on improving them. There's some great tools emerging today. There are a couple different SBOM formats and some awesome tools to make it easier to work with so you don't have to generate giant XML documents by hand, which is everybody's least favorite thing to do. And we're starting to see adoption of it as well. One of the Kubernetes releases of 2021 actually started to package a bill of materials with each release cut. So this is a huge JSON/XML document today, but it's already seeing use. The sprawl of dependencies inside of Kubernetes, one of the most adopted open source projects out there, has led to maintainers actually trying to curate those dependencies and reduce them over time. Instead of just growing and getting more and more tangled each week as people add new functionality, this has led to a conscious effort to reduce the dependency count and make sure that Kubernetes only depends on things that are responsibly maintained and have large bus factors. So it's not just one person and all of these things. So again, by showing the transparency of one project, we're seeing an improvement of the dependency tree for everybody using Kubernetes. Sig Store, these are some complicated architecture diagrams, and we could do a whole talk on this at some point. But the real goal here is supply chain transparency. Like I talked about before, if you npm install a package, you're actually getting a built artifact. You're not getting the source code anymore. And there's no real way to make that link secure. We don't know which source code went into that artifact. There's no way to cryptographically prove that. Fortunately, we've had this technology around for a while. We have digital signatures. We have code signing certificates. They are just not accessible for open source maintainers today. To get a code signing certificate, you have to pay a bunch of money and have somebody come and audit your business and prove that you are who you say you are. This might work great for large vendors shipping pieces of software, but it doesn't work for individual maintainers. So just like Let's Encrypt did for browsers, setting up some standards where people could request certificates and get them on the fly through a lightweight verification process, Sig Store aims to do that for open source maintainers. People can run a single command, have their browser pop open, verify their identity, which is based on an email address or OpenID Connect protocol, and get a code signing certificate that they can use to sign open source packages as they're built. And this can be integrated directly into build and CI/CD systems, so you can sign things without having to manage keys or YubiKeys or have key signing parties or anything like the old days. And so making a huge set of developer-first tooling that's automatic and free is going to help improve the integrity of open source supply chains all across the industry. Then finally, the sustainability piece. Money is not the answer, but it is necessary, right? It's not sufficient, but it is necessary to fix a lot of this. It's kind of crazy that huge projects are built by volunteers and then used inside of code bases making millions and billions of dollars a year. It's not always fair, but it's not always easy to fix either. And so organizations like the OpenSSF, the Open Source Software Foundation, are pooling money together from companies across the industry that are interested in fixing this and setting up programs to hand out grants and hire full-time maintainers that are dedicated to improving the security of code bases. They're setting up free audits that open source software projects can request to get security experts to come in and look and provide reviews and look for vulnerabilities before they're found by attackers. So we can start fixing things and getting ahead of the curve here. So there's a bunch of different programs inside of the OpenSSF. You can find them at openssf.org if you want to get involved. So hopefully that presentation kind of pointed out the state of open source security across the industry, showed some scary stuff at the beginning to get your attention, and then left on somewhat of a high note. If you want to get involved in any of these initiatives, here are some links. And if you want to reach me, here's my contact information one more time. So thanks for listening to the presentation today.
Hey everybody, happy Tuesday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with the headlines. First up on Devops.com is an article that looks at how to avoid crappy culture and keep developers happy. Yep, that title gets right to the point. Software engineers know how much they are worth. Everyone wants them, and there aren't enough of them to fill that demand. While the need for tech talent is greater than ever, the pandemic has shifted priorities for many engineers, and they're not alone. It's a reality shared with millions of others in a variety of fields around the world. If the so-called Great Resignation has taught us anything, it's that everyone is tired of crappy workplace culture. People are beginning to question why they'd stick around at a place where they don't feel valued and supported. And for those companies not investing time and energy into their culture, good luck holding on to software engineers. In this uber-competitive environment, the best way to keep software engineers happy and make the company a desirable place to join is simple. Trust engineers to do their jobs well. Put in place the building blocks for a supportive environment where people feel comfortable taking risks and voicing their ideas, even contradictory ones, in positive ways. Then just get out of the way. Leaders have a responsibility to make these values stick and to hire people who fit them, even if that means not always picking the most qualified person available. This article outlines how leaders can create an environment that supports developers so they can be productive and be happy at the same time. It's an important topic and one worth considering. And we look once again at multi-cloud environments and ways that organizations can tackle the complexities therein. The pandemic put incredible pressure on organizations to modernize and accelerate digital transformation efforts, with many businesses rushing to embrace cloud strategies in response. According to this year's Enterprise Cloud Index from Nutanix, multi-cloud is now the most commonly deployed IT environment and the only IT model on an upward adoption trajectory. In fact, nearly 2/3 of organizations plan to operate a multi-cloud environment within 3 years. But there are complexities and challenges of managing across cloud borders that organizations are still grappling with, and concerns about security, data integration, and cost remain. Enterprises will need to find ways to leverage existing cloud investments and redefine best practices and what it means to have agility and resilience in IT. This article looks at the challenges of multi-cloud worth noting and offers up some valid ways in which organizations can effectively utilize multi-cloud without buckling under the complexity. In news, SolarWinds has launched an observability platform that makes many of its tools and technologies available via a common user interface. The SolarWinds hybrid cloud observability platform also makes an observability platform affordable for a much wider range of organizations. The platform also makes it easier to discover, map, and understand dependencies in ways that make it easier to achieve and maintain service level objectives. The SolarWinds Hybrid Cloud Observability Platform is a suite of tools made available via multiple tiers that make it easier to automatically discover the root cause of an IT issue, in addition to simplifying configuration, reporting, and planning tasks across cloud computing and on-premises IT environments. All right, over on Container Journal, we look at a problem with AWS's hotfix for the Log4j shell vulnerability, which was discovered by Palo Alto Network's Unit 42 research team. Apparently, the fix inadvertently made it possible for every container in a Kubernetes cluster to take over the underlying host. Yikes. AWS created its hotfix for the Log4j shell vulnerabilities and then made it freely available to any organization running Log4j log management software on any platform. The vulnerability discovered by Unit 42 researchers only affects the version of that hotfix that was made available as a container. The flaw in the fix is not as egregious as the original Log4j shell. Containers running with user namespaces or as a non-root user are affected as well. AWS has since updated the hotfix, but the vulnerability is yet another example of why organizations need to adopt modern IT incident management practices based on Devsecops principles. All right, over on Security Boulevard, we look at the concept of automating secure coding training. More and more companies are emphasizing secure coding training for their developers, as it creates a culture of security-minded teams and incentivizes ongoing excellence for software that everyday users rely on. The latest approach within secure coding training now links real-time vulnerability detection with training curriculum, allowing Infosec teams visibility into areas of development they need to focus on the most. Individualized analysis of a company's software that finds areas of needed improvement can not only vastly improve security, but also illustrate to all involved, from the most junior developer to the highest C-level exec overseeing products, that security-related training at the development level is anything but a cost center. Instead, it's a differentiator and can reduce costs in the long run. This article looks at the benefits of combining the power of vulnerability detection with automated training programs that use real-life coding challenges for developers, and why approaching secure coding training from an automated perspective makes a lot of sense. And finally, we have the results of a survey by VMware that suggests more cyber attacks designed to undermine the integrity of public markets are being launched by cartels of cyber criminals. According to these survey results, cybercrime cartels are now targeting market data as part of an effort to manipulate the value of financial instruments such as corporate stocks. 2/3 of survey respondents report they are seeing attacks that specifically target market strategies. 1/4 of those attacks are primarily aimed at market data, with 44% of those identifying Kronos attacks aimed at manipulating timestamps to impact market positions. Nearly 2/3 of respondents also report an increase in brokerage account takeovers. Financial institutions are also seeing more ransomware attacks, with nearly 3/4, or 74%, reporting they have experienced one or more ransomware attacks in the last year. Nearly 2/3 of those victims admit to paying ransom to retrieve data, according to the report. Bad stuff there. All right, that's it for the headlines. I'll be back on, I guess it's next week actually, since I'm going to the InnoTech Austin event in a day or two. But until then, I hope everybody has a great day, and please, whatever you do, stay safe.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everybody, welcome back to TechStrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, and I am here now with Juan Orlandini, who is a distinguished engineer over at Insight. Juan, thank you so much for taking a few minutes and talking with me today. Do appreciate it.
Oh, good to meet you, Charlene, and I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. Well, I wonder, I'm interested in talking to you about a report that was, that I guess Insight commissioned from IDG, I think it is, yeah, IDG Research, and talks about some of the issues that organizations are facing as they kind of switch over to a DevOps model. But before we dive into that report, some of those results, I wonder if you can introduce us to Insight, because I'm not sure that everybody knows your organization.
Right. So I'll dive into the report after this, but Insight is a global integrator. We are based out of the Phoenix area. We're just moving into brand new world headquarters in Chandler, where we're in Tempe, and we're really excited about that. We're about 13,000 teammates strong, about $9.5 billion in sales, and we work across a wide swath of IT-related challenges that our clients have, everything from our more traditional history of being a reseller to now we have more than half of our team is actually focused on doing systems integration kinds of things. So we do a lot in the public cloud. We do a lot of stuff on private infrastructure, and increasingly we're doing more in a hybrid nature as well. And everything from writing the brand new app all the way to building your infrastructure from scratch, we've done it all.
Very, very cool. Well, I will say that being a native of Arizona, I remember driving down I-10 and seeing the Insight building as I was driving past in Tempe. So it's always great to have a little slice of home here on TechStrong TV. So thank you very much for joining me on this. And Insight is a very, very interesting company. I've seen them kind of grow up over the last 20 years or so. So always good to see a success story there as well. But let's talk about this report that you guys commissioned from IDG Research Services. What did you guys set out to do with it?
You know, this is, I think, either the 4th or 5th year that we've been doing this research.
Okay.
And what we're trying to do is capture where our clients are in their journey of modernizing their environments. And it could be anything from modernizing their infrastructure to modernizing their cloud consumption, or what are the challenges that they're facing running their businesses effectively. And so we deliberately make sure that there are questions in there that are more more business focused, as well as looking into, hey, how does the IT functions that organization have support those business goals? And we're also looking to understand this from the perspective of larger organizations. The intent behind that is to understand not that smaller organizations don't have these smaller problems, but when you grow to be a 4,000, 5,000, 10,000, 100,000 person organization, other things crop up. So it could be everything from technology issues to increasingly and very commonly, it's a conversation around organizational change management, or how do we help our clients navigate the structure of their teams so that they can adopt a lot of these technologies and things that they're trying to do for their business. So it's a fascinating look at a wide swath of problems that our clients bring to the table.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you guys really do dig in and get a lot of the more nitty gritty stuff that maybe some of the other reports aren't really going into. So tell me a little bit about some of the results there. You mentioned you guys have been doing this for 4 or 5 years. Are there any particular results in this year's report that, based on the results of previous years, maybe surprised you?
That's a great question. I don't know that any of them truly surprised us. They validated a lot of our thinking. All right. And we see, the good news is that we work with a lot of our clients on a day-to-day basis. All right. So this survey actually went to a audience that was made up of both Insight customers and non-Insight customers. We didn't want to bias it that way. All right. So this validation actually came back and matched exactly what we had been seeing, is that everybody's accelerating their journey. IT is becoming a much more prevalent part of everyone's business. I was just watching that show, Super Pumped. I don't know if you've seen it. It's on Showtime. It's the journey of how Uber came to be. And there's okay. Yeah, and there's a line in there, right? And I think we've all heard it before, where Travis Kalanick says, "I thought I was in the business of doing taxis. It turns out I was in IT." I was in the technology business. Yeah. And that's, I think we've all come to that realization, is like, hey, we're all in a technology business. Yeah. And not surprisingly, 9 out of 10 of our respondents, and this is a wide swath of a big population of respondents, said that they're accelerating their journey to adopting new and more and transforming their business through technology. So completely validated it. Not surprising, but it's actually kind of interesting data.
Yeah, well, obviously the pandemic accelerated a lot of plans regarding digital transformation and moving to new ways of working to be more customer centric in general. So that would not surprise me either. Perhaps maybe the rate of change as a result of the pandemic, I would think, would be a little more surprising than just the fact that the organizations are doing it. So did you notice over the last couple of years that at the beginning of, I can understand why things move so quickly, but it seems like that pace has not slowed. We're not kind of going back to the pre-pandemic rate of technology adoption. Everything seems to be, 2x, 3x, or even 10x what it was before the pandemic. So why is it that you think that does not seem to be slowing down? There was that sense of urgency at the beginning of the pandemic. I'm not sure that sense of urgency is really there anymore.
If my inbox had anything to say about it, I'll tell you it has not slowed down.
Yeah.
I don't know that I have the absolute why, but I will tell you that the sense of possible that was actually demonstrated through this global event is actually demonstrated to people that you not only can, but you have to. And I think that's maybe one of the imperatives that's driving everybody to go do this. The other thing that's happening is I think everybody's come to realize that if you don't do these things, there are going to be competitors that are going to, and you don't want to be disrupted out of business. A third one that I've started to increasingly see is that many of our clients have come to realize that their target demographic or their total addressable market has dramatically shifted because now everything is digital. Yeah. So I'll give you an example. We hosted a CIO roundtable with a client with clients. And one of the clients said, hey, we went from being this regional hospital where our target demographic was just that region. And the way we grew is by acquiring more hospitals and growing our footprint. But during the pandemic, what they realized is through doing a lot of telemedicine, now their target audience is global in scale. So now IT became the centerpiece of how they actually expand. So they grew their business dramatically that way, right? And I think there's stories like that are happening all over the place, regardless of what industry you happen to be in.
That's really, really interesting to think about that on a much more global scale. Just the way that the technology has, pretty much just broken down all the barriers. And I've heard those types of stories throughout every industry that the pandemic has actually been. I don't want to say it's a good thing, but it certainly did kind of open up people's minds and their perspective on what their business actually is and what it could be. So that has been certainly a positive to come out of everything. But that said, it really hasn't been a smooth transition for a lot of organizations. And so what do you think has, kind of remains those sticky issues, if you will, in helping, not in helping, but in hindering digital transformation for a lot of these companies, and DevOps being a large part of that conversation. What's holding them back?
Well, it's a lot of things that are in there, right? And this survey is available for everybody to read from our website. So if you go to solutions.insight.com, you can find it in there. All right. Awesome. But there's a few things that are pretty common. One is, and this is happening a lot more, is that when DevOps grew up, and it's now Devsecops, you should not have this conversation without security in the middle of the conversation at all times, right? Mm-hmm. As Devsecops grew, the financial model needed in order to support those teams didn't necessarily grow up. So there's this huge impetus now to go and figure out the financial side of the house. And that's now increasingly being called FinOps, which is a marriage of the cultural transformation that Devsecops brought to the table, mm-hmm. with a cultural transformation that is a matching of it on the financial side of the house. So I'll give you a good example of that. As part of the Devsecops journey, what we focus on now is on products. We don't work on projects, and there's a very specific thing that happens in that. A project has a beginning and an end, so it's easy to figure out roughly what it's going to cost you to create this project, because it's part of the project planning, right? You say it's going to need 10 architects, 20 delivery people, whatever it is, a couple of finance people, and I need this many whatevers to support that. So you create a budget and you stick to it, or you break it, or whatever. When you're doing a product, the big difference on that is that you're creating these durable teams that are long-lived, that don't have a beginning or an end. You create a product, an MVP typically, and then you start adding functionality through this backlog that you create that is actually getting input from your end users and the business, and then you build onto it. And if it's a successful product, you continue to build on it, right? Forever. So how do you finance forever? And there is actually a way, all right, to do that, but you got to adopt some of these things on the finance side. So that's one of them. Mm-hmm. The other thing that is not a challenge, an opportunity would be a better way to put it, is, and this is actually in our report, is the number one thing that people want to do is get more value out of the data that they're collecting or can collect. So we've heard this for decades, all right, is that the amount of data that we have is exploding, and it continues to explode, right? So when I was early in my career, the big number was a terabyte. One day you're going to have a terabyte, and everybody will look at us and go, oh my gosh, you're crazy. Nobody has a terabyte. Right. Yeah. And now we're talking about zettabytes, right? And I might as well be calling in umpteen zillion bytes, right? It's
crazy the amount of data that exists, and but it's. Yeah, I mean, it is the evolution, right? I mean, we are a data society. We are data driven in every decision that we make. So makes sense.
Yeah, and we've talked about it, right? That data is the new gold, right? So now in our report, it was very clear is that everybody's, hey, how do I get better value out of the data that I have? Or how do I acquire new data so that I can extract value or create new value for my business, right? And so there's a big move to figuring this out. And that's the data and AI conversation. And there's a lot of movement in the market around those things. So all of the hyperscalers are providing a lot of tooling around those things. There's a lot of competition with the as a service models that are designed to address this problem. There's even competition through some of the on-premises providers like an NVIDIA and the ecosystem they've created around partners like NetApp and Pure and Dell and HP and all of those things to start creating the same kind of value creation engine with an on-premises real estate where your data might have data gravity because that's where you've actually hosted most of your data. So there's a lot of challenges in that. How do I get my data scientists up to speed to the right things, or how do I provide them the right tools so that they're productive? My data architects, data engineers, how do I make sure that they have all of the things that they need? And that's a challenge, right? And then on top of that, you have the Devsecops that's working alongside of them and the FinOps that's working with them. So it gets complicated, so very much. And one of the things that gets exposed through this thing is that there's an organizational change management thing that you got to do as well. Mm-hmm. Because adopting all of these things, it's a big cultural change for an organization. And you got to manage that just as much as you got to manage your tooling and your gizmos and gadgets, wherever they happen to be hosted at.
Yeah, well, the culture, I think it's actually one of the most important elements in a successful dev or DevSecOps transition, and just, wholesale adoption. And that doesn't mean that DevOps or DevSecOps needs to be adopted everywhere within the organization, especially at the beginning. I think I've seen the most success in environments that have adopted Dev or DevSecOps, that they iterated it. That like one department would adopt it and then another, and then to the point where there's enough DevSecOps happening in the organization that it just becomes part of the culture. But it can't be one of these, okay, we're doing DevOps now, and everybody's like, what? No, I don't understand that. It's you got to get that buy-in, and you got to prove the success before you can actually, bring it on to a much larger audience. But I wonder if the companies that are kind of feeling the pain, if you will, in adopting the DevOps methodology and practices, maybe they're approaching it from the wrong way. Maybe they are trying to kind of, to eat the entire elephant at once.
So it's funny that you said that quote, because I use it all the time. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Yeah,
exactly.
Right? Yeah. It's exactly right. And no truer words have been spoken about start small and then iterate, which is what you said as well. We have seen many instances where organizations said, we're doing DevOps. And then you take these massive dev teams, 500, 800, 1,000 people strong, and say, you're going to go learn how to do DevOps. And you get chaos. And it's terrible, right? Where we have seen the success is exactly what you're saying is, hey, start with something that you can prove value to the business very quickly, and start with a team that is amenable to doing these things, right? And work with them and enable them and see if the magic happens. And if it does, then take that as a learning lesson for your organization, and then do that to other teams that are of the same time. And you create the snowball effect that over time, you're going to start being able to get the rest of the organization to adapt. And you know what? At the end of the day, it's not necessarily true that you need to have your whole organization do that. Like some of this mainframe stuff that's still running around, they'll probably be around forever. Yep. You're never going to make it DevOps, or you might not, right? You can do DevOps things on the mainframe, but you might not need to, right?
Right.
And so, yeah, we're going to be living in a blended world for a long time, and be intentional about where you're applying these principles is very clear. And that's actually in the report if you read between the lines.
Well, we've been talking about these things with DevOps for quite a while now. So it seems like, everything old is new. As much as things change, they pretty much stay the same. And at the end of the day, I think the one thing that either marks the success of a company or the failure of a company to adopt DevOps really has to do with its people. So I think that is a larger conversation for another time. But thank you so much for walking me through some of the results of the report. It's very, very fascinating, and I do appreciate your sharing it with us.
Oh, thanks for having us. And like I said, the report's got tons and tons of stuff. We just barely skimmed over the surface of it, right? So please go read it. I think everybody can find a lot of value in it.
Excellent. What is the title of the report? We didn't even actually mention that.
Actually, you know what? I'm going to look it up so I don't lie to you.
All right.
It's The Path to Digital Transformation, Where IT Leaders Stand. And it is hosted, again, as I said, on our site, solutions.insight.com. And please come look at us. We have a wealth of other great resources in there for our audience to go and go look at and learn some good stuff from.
All right, great. Well, thank you again, Juan. It was great talking to you. I appreciate your time, and let's have another chat in the future.
I would love to.
All right.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, please stick around. We've got lots more Tech Strong TV coming up, so stay tuned.
Looking for a live conference focused on the tools, technologies, and practices most important to your business? Innotech conferences are live one-day business and technology conferences highlighting the latest in trends for IT leaders, developers, and IT professionals. Each event combines education, innovation, peer-to-peer networking, and the latest technology and business solutions for a diverse IT-focused audience. Innotech conferences occur throughout the year in strategic regional locations, bringing together technology professionals from various industries to learn about the solutions, practices, and tools impacting their day-to-day work and gain insight into what's to come. Presenters at Innotech conferences are selected and curated to ensure each session provides the most up-to-date and relevant information without any hype. Whether you're interested in digital transformation, cybersecurity, cloud, IT leadership, or DevOps, Innotech conferences deliver. 2022 events are scheduled to be held in Austin, Dallas, Oklahoma City, Houston, and Washington, D.C. Innotech conferences are produced by TechStrong Live and powered by TechStrong Group.
Hey, everybody. Hope everybody's having a great day. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with the webinars preview. I always tell you we have so many great webinars coming up on Devops.com, Container Journal, and Security Boulevard. I got 3 here that are going to rock your world. So I do encourage you to sign up and join us. The first one is called Show Value Fast, 3 practical ways to get started with VSM, or Value Stream Management. This one is happening Wednesday, April 27th at 11 a.m. Eastern on Devops.com. It is sponsored by Platora. The fast evolution of the value stream management market is proof of its ultimate value proposition, which is a holistic view of the entire development value stream from idea to production. Not only does value stream management provide a clear path to accelerating application delivery, it also identifies the value delivered to the customer and to the organization. This webinar will offer 3 practical ways to get started with value stream management. These options not only accelerate value delivery to specific groups or teams, but also put organizations on the path to larger opportunities with value stream management without months of internal selling. Good stuff. All right, the second one is there's no easy button for managing Kubernetes in the cloud. Oh, well. This one is happening Thursday, April 28th at 11 a.m. Eastern on Devops.com. This is sponsored by Mirantis. The cloud and containerization have revolutionized the way organizations develop, deploy, and monitor applications. However, they are not a panacea. Most technology environments are highly complex and contain a variety of virtualized workloads, multiple clouds, and on-premises infrastructure, and multiple container technologies. This webinar will discuss some challenges to moving to a public cloud, the more efficient ways to more efficiently manage your Kubernetes infrastructure, and some drivers to keep workloads on premises. Interesting. All right, the last one is called Plan and Protect, a modern plan for open source security. This one is happening Monday, May 2nd at 11 a.m. Eastern on Security Boulevard. It is sponsored by WhiteSource. In today's digital world, open source software is vital to modern application development. And as we know, what's important to the business world is important to threat actors. But how can companies successfully combat the rising tide of vulnerabilities? This webinar will discuss the value of blending proactive practices to code security with a mitigation framework that allows you to react effectively to incidents. Another good one. All right, that's it for the webinar's preview. I'll be back, I guess next week with a brand new batch for you. Until then, I hope everybody has a great day. And please, whatever you do, stay soon, stay safe. Stay soon, stay safe.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, Devsecops, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
All right, we are back. Next up, we have The View with Vizard. This one features Mike Vizard speaking with Sonar Source CEO Olivier Godin. Sonar Source just recently garnered $400 million in funding, and so Olivier and Mike talk about how it's going to be used to improve the quality of code. Great conversation. Let's roll it now.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Olivier Godin, who's CEO for Sonar Source. They have just pulled together $400 million in investment, and we're going to talk about where that's going to be applied. Olivier, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks for having me.
I'm not sure everybody knows who Sonar Source is, so why don't you describe the company for a little bit and then maybe clue us in as to where does $400 million need to be spent to move the company forward?
Okay, so Sonar Source is a Swiss company based out of Geneva. It has been around for 13 years now. We have 4 offices, Geneva, of course, one in France, one in Germany, and one in Austin, Texas, where we have about 80 people. And what we do is what we call clean code, which is really we help companies to manage what we consider is an asset, their source code, for it to not become a liability. That's really what we do.
And when we analyze the code, are we focusing on the quality or the security? Or is that the full gamut of that definition? Because in some ways, maybe quality and security are becoming one and the same thing.
I think you can. We see it as many different things. But at the end, which is many attributes like maintainability, changeability, portability, sustainability, reliability, security, safety. But at the end of the day, we consider this is one big thing, which is we help companies to comply to good standards for their code, basically. Whatever the dimension, I would say.
And is this a process that the developer manages, or is it handled more within the context of, say, a DevOps workflow, and we embed this within a CI/CD system? What are my options here?
So the way we look at it is we actually believe all stakeholders in development should be involved, but we definitely believe that the developers should drive the process. They should own this code standard. At the end of the day, if you think about it, this is part of their job, which is this is part of doing a good job to deliver a code which is at the right standard. If you put it the other way around, not delivering code that is at the right standard would mean not doing a good job. So what we think is that it should be done throughout the development lifecycle. Of course, it should start in the IDE as developers type code. They should know whether there is a problem, like a spell checker in Outlook or Gmail. We should provide some quick feedback here. And then the next step is going to be when they push their code and they create a pull request before it is merged. We should come on review. I mean, when I say we, I mean the Sonar should come on review this pull request to see whether it is as per the standard, and also enable the person who is going to review to make an educated decision on whether to merge or not. And then once you want to move your code, once you want to promote your code or to release it, again, there should be a quality gate there that tells you whether what you are about to push has the right standard. So it's not like there is one net in one place. It's more like little by little, we are filtering out to come to a point where you can push the code and you know that it has the right quality. So that's really how we approach it from a process point of view. So it's really a shared responsibility across the process. Now, if we are thinking about, I would say the methodology, which is who owns what we are pushing is really that developers, they should own all the codes that needs to be changed as part of their daily job, which is they develop a new feature, they change an existing feature, etc. All the code that is added or changed during that process, they own it. They really have the responsibility to make it be at the right standard. If we are talking about some legacy stuff that needs to be revisited because, for example, we know that we want to invest in a part of the software which has a bad quality, there might be, I would say, an effort required from the management to allocate some budget to clean things up. But that's very unusual. You might want to clean things up before you start to make big changes, because otherwise there might be so much technical debt that it's going to be impossible to make any change. So I think I would say generally it belongs to developers and development teams.
Nobody sets out, I think, to develop a low quality application. So what's changing now, and why is there so much more focus on the quality of the code that developers are creating?
So I think there was always, I think stakeholders in the process, there was also always some sort of consciousness that we should try to make an effort here. But I think there were a couple of things that were missing in this. One is that unless you have a way to get a quick feedback loop, to see what's happening in the ID, in the pull request, etc., unless you have this kind of way, it's very difficult to actually develop, to know that what you are developing has the right standard. It's a little bit like, again, back to the spell checker, unless you have something that underlines, you can read it, you can try to do your best, but you have no protection against the fact that one or two spelling mistakes are going to go in your text. So that's one aspect. The second aspect is that I think it has taken a while for companies and for organizations to mature and to realize that the cost of the technical debt is huge. If you speak to people who are sitting on boards of like startups or scale up, they will tell you that every time some discussions around innovation, pushing the product start, every time there's this kind of discussion, it always lands into, we have to fix this, we have to fix that. Our application does not allow this, which sounds much more like a liability. It sounds like this software is a liability much more than an asset. And I think the third component is that because there are solutions for this now, because these solutions, they can be embedded in the developer pipeline, and because it comes at pretty much no cost, because what we are saying is every time you touch a line, you just make it right. It doesn't cost you more. As soon as you know that there is a problem, you can fix it. The cost is really not substantial. People have realized that it is not a fatality to have crappy applications. For a long time, it was like, hey, this is it. There is nothing we can do about it. Now people realize that actually there is something you can do. It's going to take a little while to remediate, but at least we can put in place something that will incrementally and systematically remediate the quality.
Mm-hmm. I don't think that developers are against scanning their code per se, but I think they kind of treat it like the gym. They tell themselves they're going to go do that, and then the week they forget to do it, and then by the time they get around to doing it, there's a massive amount of code that they have to scan, and then they're like, well, that's a half a day of effort right there. So what is the best practice, or how do we get developers to kind of code things in a timely way that they then scan in a timely way and kind of address this issue?
So I really like your metaphor with the gym. I think it's exactly right. If you wait Sunday to do your gym, you are gonna have so much to catch up on that eventually you are going to be discouraged and you are going to do nothing of your week. I think here it's the same, which is, again, in your IDE, we highlight, so you know already, you get a chance to do the quick thing here. And then in the pull request, the guy who is going to review your code gets also the same chance. And then once you merge, there is a quality gate that's going to happen. And I think this is where organizations, they can help for people to make it like a routine rather than waiting and it becomes like a big mountain to climb, where you have a quality gate. Every time you merge, you have a quality gate that's going to tell you it's not green. And you have to make it that when it's not green, this is not acceptable. Like it has to be fixed. Same way continuous integration works, like with all the build tools. When the build is red, the rule is when the build is red, there is nothing more important than fixing the build. That's the same thing here. When your quality gate is red, there is nothing more important. And because this is atomic, it's actually one merge that was done, it is still a fairly small thing to fix. So basically, what we are saying is that the only thing that organizations should put in place is a quality gate on the new or change code that should always be green. This is it.
How smart can all of this get? Because some folks are always going to be inherently lazy and maybe not want to go to the proverbial gym. So are we going to see artificial intelligence come along at some point and just turn everything green for us? Or does the developer have to participate in the process?
Well, I think artificial intelligence certainly can help a little bit here. I'm not sure it's going to really help to find problems. Maybe it can help to identify patterns where we can safely do like a automatic code fix. Maybe this kind of stuff. But I think at the end of the day, so technically, certainly AI can help. But I think I would like to come back a little bit on the philosophical side here, which is, at the end of the day, this is the work of a developer. And I think all developers, they want to do a good job. I mean, I am a big believer that 80%, 90% of the developers, they want to do a better job. So if something tells them they can improve, I think they will go for it. I think they will also learn out of that, which is, once you have made 10 times the same mistake, it's likely that you are going to, start thinking about it, being a bit more cautious, like spelling. when you do 10 times the same mistake, after a while you start to get it. Grammarly is a helper, but at some stage you do less mistakes when you write more. So I think fine. Kind of trying to replace, to kind of remove that from the responsibility of the developer. I don't think it's in my opinion, it's not a very good direction, because you suddenly you are making like it's not part of the job to do this. And I think at the end of the day, you mentioned the fact that people, some people will never do their gym. I think at the end of the day, if some developers are uninterested to do a good job, I don't know that these are the developers you want to have in your organization.
Mm-hmm. We also see a lot more dependency between organizations around applications. Do you think that there'll be more reviews and audits of code that people will require because they're dependent upon code that somebody else is creating, and they're basically going to ask some tougher questions soon?
It's a very good point. And we had been thinking at some stage at Sonar that we should do some analysis of open source, for example, just to provide some view. When people are hesitant between choosing one library or another library to solve a problem, we could actually provide them information about how good internally, how good these libraries are, to help to make a choice, to also think about, if I start to have issues, is it likely it's going to be fixable? Am I going to have many issues, etc., etc. We never put that in motion, because we also never felt like there's so many libraries that compete between each other. But I agree with you that I think as the maturity rises in this domain, it's going to be likely that people who are consuming somebody else's software, they will want to know what is the quality of that software, for sure. Whether it's a proprietary open source software, I'm sure there will be some ask for like badges to confirm that they pass quality gates, for example.
Yeah. Of course, there are always carrots and sticks that managers apply to get people to do the right thing, and no one wants to go to the stick unless they absolutely have to. So what are some of the best practices for putting carrots in front of developers to get them to focus on quality?
Well, again, I think there is a natural carrot for developers to do a better job. So that, it's a little bit like the gym again, which is once you have done it in the morning, you feel good, and that should be the motivation to do it the next day. So once you start to pull the trigger, it should feel good. I think the way we look at that is we have always been carrot driven. I have to say that there were a couple of features in the products that were more like that have been used as sticks. And once we realized that they were used as sticks, we change them, and sometimes we remove them, because this domain, if you start to show the stick, it's not going to happen, or it's going to happen in the short term for the wrong reason. From a carrot perspective, I think the next big thing we would like to do is some sort of gamification, which is if we could tell people, same way Grammarly does it. I don't know if you use Grammarly. It's great. You get, sometimes you get this report where they tell you that you are in the top 10% in your organization, that you have reduced your, I can't remember, you have reduced your rate of errors by X%, etc. This kind of stuff, I think, is extremely motivating for developers, and we would like to actually introduce this. We thought about it a couple of years ago. It didn't happen, but this is something which we want to add in the coming year. We really feel it's going to help people to engage and to feel valued for what they are doing.
All right. Hey, Olivia, thanks for being on the show, folks. If you want to feel better about yourself, start with the quality assurance and work your way backwards, right? Olivia, have a great day.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks for having me.
All right. And back to you guys in the studio.
All right, that wraps up today's TechStrong TV. Hope you enjoyed it as much as I always enjoy bringing it to you. A couple quick reminders. We are going to be at the InnoTech Austin event tomorrow. It's our live in-person IT conference happening in Austin. And we're actually going to be live streaming some of the sessions during the day. And I've also got a couple interviews lined up for you. So you can see that right here on TechStrong TV tomorrow. Because of that, we will not have a fresh news show for you on Thursday. We will be running a rerun on Thursday and Friday this week. So I will be back with a brand new episode for you next Monday. But if you are in the Austin area and you feel like coming out and saying hello, please do. I'm going to be at InnoTech Austin, flying out a little bit later on today. And please do come and say hello. And if for some reason you're not able to make InnoTech Austin, that's okay. Come see me in Dallas next month. I'll be doing the exact same thing on May 11th. If you're interested in either one of these events, you can go to innotechaustin.com or innotechdallas.com and check out the agendas, the speaker lineups, and the registration form. You can go ahead and get registered right there on the site. We also have a lot of other events coming up throughout the year. I do encourage you to check out the entire lineup at techstrongevents.com. That's it for me today. I will see you next week unless I see you tomorrow in Austin. Until then, I hope everybody has a great day and a great rest of the week. And please, whatever you do, stay safe.